Chapter 598. Something big happened. Something big was right before their eyes, so what else could happen? General Chu loathed these words and kicked the soldier as soon as he knelt. What are you muttering about? If this isn't big enough, I'll kill you as a sacrifice to the flag. The matter was so serious that the soldier couldn't care less about his fear. He hurriedly reported, General, all of Western Zhou's forces have been concentrated in the north to attack Yuyuan County. The Duke of Qin has deployed 2 armies from the central and southern regions to attack Yaoshui County. Both the north and south sides have already started fighting. Hearing this, General Chu felt like he'd suffered a heavy blow. He staggered back a few steps before leaning against the city walls to steady himself. His face was completely white, while Chu Yuni was gaping at the side. The 3 armies had joined forces. 3 armies had joined forces. So this was the real deal. Both he and Ning Qing had been tricked by Long Fei Yi. Western Zhou's 3 eastern prefectures all bordered Tianning to the east. From north to south, they were Yuyuan Prefecture, Fenglin Prefecture, and Yaoshui Prefecture. North of the northernmost Yuyuan Prefecture was the 3-way battlefield, while the southernmost Yaoshui Prefecture bordered the central and southern regions. General Chu personally oversaw Fenglin Prefecture in the middle, which was also the main battlefield against Western Zhou. Thus, all of the Chu clan's elite troops were gathered here, making the defenses of the 2 southern prefectures less secure. Unexpectedly, Long Fei had colluded with Western Zhou and gathered their forces to attack the northernmost Yuyuan Prefecture, while the central and southern armies attacked the southernmost Yaoshui Prefecture. Meanwhile, Long Fei himself only used 5,000 elite troops to attack Fenglin Prefecture. This was the real deal. Long Fei Yi hadn't considered Ning Qing at all. He suspects Ning Qing. How could he? Chu Yuni couldn't believe it. General Chu had no time to care whether Long Fei Yi really suspected Ning Qing or had other plans. Right now, he had to think of a way to break out of Long Fei Yi's trap. He'd already decided to open the city gates for battle, but now he had to be even more cautious. Otherwise, the Chu clan troops would lose everything. All archers on standby. Everyone else, guard the city walls. After he gave the order, he turned and hurriedly went down the city walls to gather all the strategists and enter the general's tent. The general's tent was set up on the lower right side of the city gate. Not long after, all the strategists in the Chu family's army arrived. After learning about the military situation in the 2 southern counties, they were all shocked and in disbelief. On General Chu's desk was a detailed map of the 3 eastern prefectures of Western Zhou. He rested his hands on the map and frowned, deep in thought. This was a trap. A very beautiful setup. Gathering the forces of Western Zhou to deal with Yuyuan County and the forces of the south to deal with Yaoshui County, this was bullying with numbers, a battle that was guaranteed to be won. As for using 5,000 elite troops to deal with Fenglin Prefecture, this was both a restraint and a threat. If General Chu moved his troops north or south, then Fenglin Prefecture would be threatened. If he didn't move his troops north or south, then Yuyuan and Yaoshui prefectures would be lost. This joint action of the 3 armies directly tied down General Chu's limited military strength. It could be said that the Chu clan had already lost 2 cities before the battle even began. Who would have thought that Tianning's Duke of Qin, who had never led troops into battle before, would be able to set up such a beautiful trap on his first try? Aside from their shock, the strategists all secretly admired him. If Long Fei Yi hadn't set up this trap for the Chu clan, General Chu would have praised Long Fei Yi from the bottom of his heart. Unfortunately, this trap was set up for the Chu clan troops. General Chu stared at the map of the 3 eastern prefectures, feeling more and more indignant and irritable. He'd been at odds with Western Zhou for so long, but now he'd fallen at Long Fei Yi's hands. How could he accept this? After a while, none of the strategists spoke up. General Chu raised his head and scolded them angrily. What are you all spacing out for? This general didn't raise you to be rice buckets. Say something. Silence fell upon the crowd at his words. Who could make a decision in a situation like this? Actually, everyone knew that there was only one way to deal with Long Fei Ye's trap: give up 2 cities and concentrate their forces on one. But no one dared to say it aloud. With General Chu's intelligence and experience in battle, he should have known the answer long ago. He just didn't want to face it. Chu Yunyi's eyes flickered with a complicated expression as he hesitated to speak. He was inferior to General Chu when it came to leading troops into battle and arranging formations, so it was useless for him to say more. After some hesitation, he left the room. No matter what General Chu decided, he had to contact Ning Qing as soon as possible. Only Ning Qing could save them now. Seeing Chu Yunyi leave, General Chu sobered up. He clenched his fists and pounded the table a few times. Despite his reluctance, he had to make up his mind. Loudly, he said, "Great General Ning will support our Nether clan. Tell me, which city should we protect?" Hearing this, the strategists were stunned once more. They had no idea about the relationship between Great General Ning and the D clan, much less that Ning Qing had long been in cahoots with the Chu clan. They were stunned that Tianning's Great General Ning would switch sides at a time like this. Of course, none of them were idiots. After hearing the news and recalling the Duke of Qin's plans, they began to harbor suspicions. Most likely, the Duke of Qin had moved his troops ahead of time to surround the 3 eastern prefectures with Western Zhou's troops because he suspected Great General Ning long ago. "General, when did this happen? Why didn't you tell us?" one of the strategists asked in dissatisfaction. General Chu should have told everyone about such an important matter beforehand so they could prepare for it. After all of them had placed their bets on Empress Shui. General Chu glared at them. "Is this the time to discuss such things? This general is asking you a question. Which city do you want to protect?" General Chu had assumed that Ning Cheng's cavalry would arrive before Long Fei Ye's main army. He assumed that the Chu clan troops and Long Fei Ye's cavalry would be able to beat Western Zhou to a pulp within a few days. Once Long Fei Ye's troops arrived, they'd have a showdown with Long Fei Ye's troops. No matter what, they wouldn't lose even if the battle ended in a draw. But Long Fei Ye had thrown all of this into disarray. For the sake of safety, this one suggests that we concentrate all of our troops to protect Yuyun Prefecture. First of all, our army has fought with the Western Zhou army many times and is familiar with their fighting style, so it will not be easy for us to be ambushed. Second, Yuyun County is the closest to the 3-way battlefield. As long as the cavalry battalion arrives, we will be able to join forces with the cavalry battalion in the shortest time possible and lead our army south. No. Now that the Duke of Qin's troops are at our gates, there's no reason for us to abandon Fenglin Prefecture and head north. We have to defend our prefecture. Otherwise, once our morale is damaged, it'll be hard to recover. As this one sees it, why don't we give up the 3 eastern prefectures and kill our way into Tianning? As long as Great General Ning's troops don't stop us, what's wrong with giving up the 3 prefectures? Everyone had their own ideas and reasons. General Chu listened to their opinions as he mulled them over. But he didn't have much time to think before a soldier hurried over. Reporting. "General, Tianning's Duke of Qin has led his troops to the city gates. He wants to challenge you to a duel." A duel? Almost everyone present sucked in a breath of cold air. They all turned to look at General Chu, only to see that his face was as black as the bottom of a pot. "Long Fei Yi, you've gone too far." General Chu's fist pounded the table so many times that it was about to topple over. On Cloud Realm Continent's battlefields, Only at the very end of a duel between two armies would a duel between the commanding generals. In order to end the battle quickly, the winning side would give the losing side a chance to duel their commanding general. If the general of the victorious side won, the other side would surrender. If the general of the victorious side lost, the other side would have 3 days to flee. Now the two armies hadn't even crossed swords yet, but Long Fei wanted to challenge him to a duel. This was a naked insult to him. This was Long Fei's first time leading troops into battle. It wasn't that he didn't know the rules, but that he was here to break them. Abominable! Abominable! General Chu paced back and forth. Although he was furious, he still couldn't decide which city to protect. At this moment, Chu Yuni hurried over and said, Ning Cheng's troops will need at least 3 days to reach Yuyun City. 3 days? Yuyun City won't be able to hold out for 3 days, someone said with certainty. General, since the Duke of Qin wants to challenge us, why don't we think of a way to stall for time? Someone else suggested. General Chu had the same idea. He wouldn't challenge Long Fei to a duel because he'd lose without a doubt. He had to think of a way to stall for time. No matter who won or lost, as long as they could stall for 3 days, they'd have a chance to turn things around. While General Chu was still hesitating, Chu Yuni whispered 3 words by his ear. Han Yunshi. General Chu knitted his brows, while Chu Yuni's eyes flashed with a cold smile. You'll know once you get to the top of the city walls. General Chu didn't delay, but quickly climbed the walls. This time, he had a clear view of Long Fei's elite troops from his perch on the city walls. 5,000 cavalrymen lined up 1,000 meters below the city walls in an orderly fashion. Although there were only 5,000 of them, they were no less imposing than an army of 50,000. Their leader was Long Fei, but he was holding a woman in his arms. That woman was none other than Qin Wangfei, Han Yunshi. General Chu couldn't help but shake his head. A femme fatale. In the history of Cloud Realm Continent's wars, from the Great Qin Empire to the Three Kingdoms, none of the generals had ever brought a woman to battle, much less a general riding on the same horse with a woman. After all, women were nothing more than clothes to men and burdens to soldiers. But Long Fei had actually brought a woman to the battlefield for the first time. It was laughably frivolous. Long Fei had one arm around Han Yunshi's waist while the other held his sword. He sat atop his tall horse, commanding 5,000 elite troops. He wasn't wearing armor or battle robes, but black robes that made him look noble and domineering. He didn't make a sound, nor did he get angry, but his aura was enough to intimidate the entire battlefield. Han Yunshi was also dressed in black robes. Even though she was leaning against Long Fei's chest, she still looked valiant. She faced the battlefield as if she was a patient, her eyes cold and solemn. This woman wasn't beautiful when she was serious, but she still commanded respect from others. No one dared to offend her. When she saw General Chu appear on the city walls, she said in a low voice, "He's here." Long Fei pointed his sword at the top of the city walls and asked coldly, "General Chu," still not accepting the challenge. Chapter 599. General Chu was still fuming at Long Fei's provocation. Fortunately, Chu Yuni was by his side. Chu Yuni had been provoked by Long Fei in the past as well, but he was an outsider when it came to matters of the battlefield. In the end, he was a bit more clear-headed than General Chu. General Chu was about to unsheath his sword when Chu Yuni pressed down on his hand. Remember, Han Yunshi is Long Fei's weak spot. You can't go wrong with that woman. General Chu steadied his emotions and calmed down. He shouted, "Duke of Qin, our two armies haven't even fought yet, so where's the talk of a challenge? If you don't know the rules of the battlefield, then scram early. Don't make a fool of yourself." Victory and defeat have already been decided, so why bother fighting? Your lordship will take 3 of your prefectures in a single day. Long Fei said. Ha! General Chu guffawed. If it were Yuyun and Yaoshui prefectures, then it was possible that they'd fall in a single day. But Fenglin Prefecture had the main force of his Chu clan troops, a full 50,000 strong army, as well as the Nether clan's 3,000 strong archers. Long Fei only had 5,000 troops, so where did he get the nerve to joke like that, 5,000 against my 50,000? This old man understands now. So the Duke of Qin's claim of victory and defeat is to admit defeat, General Chu guffawed. Long Fei didn't waste words. He raised his sword and prepared to attack. Hold it. General Chu quickly stopped him. No matter what, he had to buy time for Yuyun and Yaoshui. Surrender. Long Fei was a man of few words, but he could always infuriate General Chu with 1 or 2 words. General Chu couldn't bear it any longer. Fine, this general accepts the challenge. But I have one condition. Speak. Long Fei said coldly. Before victory is decided, Yuyun and Yaoshui must cease fighting. That was General Chu's ultimate goal. The Serene Cloud Prefecture and Yaoshui Prefecture were the prefectures next to Fenglin. As long as Long Fei sent an eagle message over, he would be able to receive the news very quickly. Long Fei's lips curled into a sneer. General Chu, do you mean that if I lose, I'll have to pay with these 2 counties? If Long Fei didn't have a purpose, why would he waste time talking nonsense with General Chu? The reason he issued the challenge was to provoke General Chu into staying in Fenglin Prefecture. Once General Chu stayed in Fenglin Prefecture, with the strength of his 2 armies, it would be easy for them to take down the weakly defended Yuyun and Yaoshui prefectures in a day. However, if General Chu gave up on Fenglin Prefecture and went north or south to reinforce, there would be no way to end this battle quickly. And if he couldn't end this battle quickly, he would have to face Great General Ning's army. Presumably, Ning Cheng had already received the news and was rushing to the battlefield. General Chu had expected that Long Fei would raise this condition, so he agreed without hesitation. Good. If I lose, Yuyun and Yaoshui commanderies will be yours. How about it? Long Fei's lips curled into a sneer. He and General Chu would have a showdown within 2 hours. Yuyun and Yaoshui commanderies could afford to wait for 2 hours. If he could take them without losing a single soldier, why wouldn't he? It looks like General Chu is quite confident in your archery skills. He was in a good mood and rarely spoke so much. So Your Highness Duke of Qin agrees? General Chu asked seriously. This prince agrees, Long Fei replied without hesitation. Good. Then please stop the battle in Yuyun and Yaoshui commanderies, General Chu hurriedly requested. Long Fei let go of Han Yunshi and leapt off his horse, landing on the empty battlefield between the 5,000 elite soldiers and Fenglin Prefecture's gates. His black cloak fluttered in the wind as he stood proudly with one hand behind his back and the other wielding his sword. His voice was as cold as ice, shocking both armies. General Chu, if you accept my challenge, this prince will immediately order the north and south to stop fighting. But General Chu hesitated and didn't move. When 2 armies faced off against each other, a duel between the 2 commanders was naturally between the 2 commanders. Since Han Yunshi was sitting in Long Fei's seat, he could duel either the Duke of Qin or Han Yunshi. This was also why Chu Yuni had called him up here. He'd agreed to the duel so easily just then because he wanted to stall for time. First, he'd trick Long Fei into ordering a halt to the battles in the north and south. Then he'd contend with Long Fei on the dual candidates to buy more time. But Long Fei actually wanted him to go down the city walls. How was he supposed to deal with this? Although Long Fei didn't rush him, he didn't have time to waste. After all, the two commanderies had already started fighting and were probably fighting fiercely right now. While General Chu was worrying, a soldier brought him 2 battle reports. As soon as he opened them up, his expression changed. Both the north and south were in dire straits, especially Yuyun Prefecture. Emperor Kongqing had sent half a battalion of northernly cavalry to join the original army. Judging by the current situation, it was impossible to take Yuyun Prefecture before nightfall. General Chu knew that his best option right now was to give up on Fenglin Prefecture and head north to reinforce Yuyun Prefecture. Then it'd be easier for him to cooperate with Great General Ning. But Long Feiyi had already provoked him to the gates. He'd just agreed to the duel, so he'd dug a hole for himself. If you ride a tiger, it's hard to get off. Long Feiyi was unusually patient. He didn't rush him, but waited with interest. General Chu couldn't wait any longer. Duke of Qin, Qin Wangfei is the commander. Since it's a duel, Old Man will arrange for a female deputy general in my camp to fight. He didn't give Long Feiyi a chance to respond. He immediately ordered a female archer to take up the challenge. The female archer didn't have a bow with her, only a quiver full of arrows. She flew to land in front of Long Fei, seemingly afraid to draw close. Unfortunately, Long Feiyi didn't give her a second thought. He didn't even spare her a glance. He looked up at General Chu and mocked, "You're sending a woman to fight? So there's no more men in your Chu clan army?" Han Yunshi laughed from atop her horse. "If there's no more men in the Chu clan army, then this princess can only fight in His Highness Duke of Qin's place." It was one thing for Long Feiyi to be infuriating, but Han Yunshi was simply infuriating. Didn't her back hurt from talking while sitting? "You!" General Chu raged, but he gritted his teeth. "Long Feiyi, since you're not interested in a duel, then this soldier won't keep you company." As soon as he finished speaking, he hurried off. He'd only pushed the female archer forward to give himself a way out of this embarrassing situation by refusing the duel. He'd long given up on the idea of a duel, but he couldn't afford to waste time here. He had to dispatch troops to Yuyun Prefecture immediately. Long Feiyi had wasted so much time with him, so how could he let him go so easily? He didn't waste words with General Chu, but retreated to his horse. With a wave of his sword, he split the 5,000 soldiers into 2 groups, revealing 2 red coat cannons hidden among them. The soldiers on the city walls didn't even have time to report when they spotted the cannons. Long Feiyi had long ordered the cannons to fire. Boom! Boom! The 2 cannons fired in quick succession, catching General Chu off guard and blasting off a corner of the city walls. General Chu and Chu Yuni were still on their way down the stairs when they were shocked by the explosion. General Chu was stunned for a long time before he gave orders to his men and rushed up the city walls. "Defend the forts, quick! Quick!" Cloud Realm Trade Consortium had given him 4 red coat cannons, making him like a tiger that had grown wings. He'd left 2 of these cannons in Fenglin Prefecture and the other 2 in Yuyun and Yaoshui Prefectures. He never expected Long Feiyi to have such rare cannons as well. General Chu saw the 2 red coat cannons as soon as he reached the top of the city walls. He immediately ordered the cannons to fire, but Long Feiyi seemed to be planning to abandon the cannons altogether. He only left a few men to guard the cannons while the 5,000 soldiers split into 2 groups to attack the city walls from the left and right. A corner of the city walls had already been blasted open, so the consequences would be unthinkable if the cavalry managed to break in. General Chu ordered the archers to take up arms. Soon enough, a rain of arrows rained down on Long Feiyi's soldiers from the left and right. In the middle was an artillery battle, and on the left and right sides were a rain of arrows. Although General Chu was very unhappy, this war had still started. Once the war started, he would not have the opportunity to transfer his troops to the north and south. Summon all the archers under the city. Fire arrows on the right. Crossbow bolts on the left. Quick! Someone come, fire the cannons. Blow up their robes. General Chu quickly got into the swing of things as soon as he gave orders. Both sides had 2 red coat cannons, so they were evenly matched in this regard. The center of the battlefield was filled with the sounds of cannons and fireworks. But the left and right sides were the fiercest. None of Long Fei Ye's soldiers were easy to deal with. They dodged the arrows as they closed in on the city walls. Many of them had already leapt off their horses to fight their way up the walls. General Chu was alarmed. He could tell that Long Fei Ye's elite soldiers had plenty of martial arts experts, but he never expected there to be so many of them. Seeing that the situation had taken a turn for the worse, he ordered, "Someone come, open the gates and meet the enemy." As soon as the gates opened, the soldiers and horses rushed out from the left and right sides to meet Long Fei Ye's elite soldiers head-on. As a result, they were more or less able to pin down the experts who'd flown up the walls. Chu Yuni also made a prompt decision to call in the Nether Clan's driving arrow squad to deal with the experts threatening the city walls. Arrows rained down everywhere, forcing many of the experts to retreat. Finally, the situation was stabilized. General Chu had assumed that the Chu clan's troops far outnumbered Long Fei Ye's elite soldiers and would quickly seize control of the situation. But as it turned out, half of the Chu clan's troops were only barely enough to keep Long Fei Ye's forces in check. They couldn't even take control of the battle, much less end it quickly. Using 5,000 elite soldiers against 25,000 was like striking a rock with an egg. But Long Fei Ye's 5,000 elite soldiers were all trained by him. They'd been raised in the vicinity of the three-way battlefield all year round, ready to face any changes at any time. Each of these soldiers was equal to 3 men. In terms of numbers, they were far more than just 5,000. General Chu was experienced enough to tell that something was amiss. "Oh no, we can't end the battle quickly. Then what do we do? Are we supposed to just watch as Yu Yun and Yao Shui are taken away from us?" Chu Yuni was very irritated. The battle had already begun, so they had to end it quickly. Otherwise, if this battle dragged on for a day or two, they'd have to face a pincer attack from the north and south. Then they'd lose without a doubt. If Chu Yuni wasn't blind in one eye, he'd be able to kill Long Fei Ye's elite soldiers with a few arrows from his vantage point. General Chu shot arrows as he tried to come up with a plan. "Someone come, pass on orders to mobilize the entire army. Everyone will be rewarded for destroying the Duke of Qin's 5,000 soldiers." Would Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi be able to deal with all 50,000 soldiers? Chapter 600. Would Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi be able to deal with the 50,000 troops stationed in Fenglin Prefecture? It wasn't clear what Long Fei Yi thought, but General Chu was certain of his victory. 50,000 against 5,000 was bound to draw criticism. Even if he won, it'd be considered an unfair victory. General Chu was a seasoned veteran who cared a lot about face, but this time he was ready to risk everything. No matter what price he had to pay, he had to destroy Long Fei's troops within a day. General Chu's orders raised the morale of the entire army. The 25,000 men hidden within the city and outside moved out at the same time. In the end, the Chu clan troops had the advantage in numbers and quickly gained the upper hand. But just as General Chu was feeling smug about his decision, he discovered something to his horror. Where were Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi? They seemed to have vanished from sight as soon as the two armies started fighting. Where are they? General Chu stopped firing his arrows to search for Long Fei Yi and the rest in the sea of people below. Unfortunately, he couldn't find them. On one side, Chu Yuni was searching as well, but to no avail. The situation was good, but Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi were nowhere to be found. Instead of being happy, they were terrified. "General, be careful." Suddenly, an arrow shot out from behind General Chu. General Chu looked in the direction of the arrow and saw a black-robed expert holding a woman in his arms. The man had shot up from below the city walls and was aiming for him with a sword. This black-robed expert was none other than Long Fei Yi. And the woman in his arms was none other than Qin Wangfei, Han Yunxi. As the saying went, to catch bandits, first capture the king. They were aiming for General Chu. Fortunately, General Chu was warned and quickly backed away. At the same time, the driving arrow archers behind him fired their arrows. Long Fei Yi was about to reach the city walls when he was stopped. All he could do was block the arrows with his sword and use the walls as leverage to rise into the air. After General Chu calmed down, he immediately pulled out an arrow and shot it. His attention was all on Long Fei Yi. Who knew that Han Yunxi would aim at his heart and shoot out a pear blossom teardrop rain poison needle? "Be careful." Chu Yuni cried out in alarm and shoved General Chu aside, causing the needle to miss its mark and hit Chu Yuni's shoulder instead. Heaven knows what kind of poison Han Yunxi had used, but Chu Yuni was left kneeling on the ground, completely devoid of strength. It wasn't until they reached the top that Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi discovered that Chu Yuni was blind in one eye. Both of them were very curious. It wasn't easy to blind Chu Yuni in one eye. Who was it that did this? Of course, now was not the time to be curious. When the time came, they would not have the time to think too much. "Brother." General Chu was shocked. He didn't expect Han Yunxi to have such a hidden card. Chu Yuni decisively shoved him aside. "Don't worry about me. Kill them all. If I die, you'll be in charge of the Nether clan." General Chu angrily fired a volley of arrows at Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi. It had to be said that General Chu's archery skills were on par with Long Fei Yi's. Each arrow was filled with boundless power, forcing Long Fei Yi to retreat. Combined with the constant attacks of the driving arrow archers, Long Fei Yi was forced out of the city walls and had nowhere to go. It was not easy to dodge so many arrows in the air if there was no place to borrow strength. Seeing this, General Chu and the driving arrow technique all stepped up their attacks, aggressive and aggressive. "Han Yunxi, hand over the antidote, or else I'll have you all die here," General Chu warned angrily. But Han Yunxi wasn't worried about Long Fei Yi's situation at all. Instead, she grew even more arrogant. "If you have the skills, come and get it yourself. Ignorant woman." General Chu gritted his teeth and leaped onto the city wall. Standing on top of the city wall, he grabbed another bunch of arrows and shot them without hesitation. The surrounding driving archers all cooperated with him in shooting arrows. In a flash, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi were surrounded by hundreds of arrows. Long Fei Yi had nowhere to go, making his situation worrisome. Swish! Suddenly, an arrow pierced Long Fei Yi's shoulder. General Chu rejoiced and fired like a madman. He didn't give Long Fei Yi a chance to catch his breath. Long Fei Yi's injured arm was the one holding Han Yunxi, so he could only keep retreating down the city walls. General Chu chased after him, along with all of the driving arrow archers, forcing Long Fei Yi into a dead end. There was nowhere for him to run except down the city walls. General Chu only laughed coldly. "Duke of Qin, you should never have brought a woman onto the battlefield. A plaything like this will only ruin things. Hand her over and I'll spare your life." Long Fei Yi kept retreating without making a sound. His arm was bleeding profusely. Han Yunxi cursed General Chu. "So what if she's a woman? Isn't your mother a woman? Is your mother a plaything?" As she cursed, she shot out poison needles. Unfortunately, General Chu dodged all of them. You don't know what's good for you. If I were you, I would hand over the antidote and not implicate the Duke of Qin. General Chu was most concerned about the antidote, so he didn't notice the sneer on Long Fei Ye's face. He was still chasing after them. General Chu, how about we make a bet? Let's bet on whether the Duke of Qin will hand me over. Han Yunxi sneered arrogantly, provoking General Chu to chase even harder. You have to hand it over even if you don't want to. With a glance, he immediately ordered the surrounding driving arrow archers to get into formation. They surrounded Long Fei Yi from all directions. He took the upper position and aimed an arrow at Han Yunxi. Duke of Qin, if you don't hand over this woman, I'll make sure you never have the chance to regret it. He was so cunning. He didn't even give Long Fei Yi a chance to reply. He changed the direction of the arrow and shot directly at Long Fei Ye's eyes. Right at this moment, a dark needle flew out of nowhere and silently sank into General Chu's arm. The entire needle sank into his flesh. General Chu only felt a sharp pain in his arm before he couldn't feel anything. General Chu quickly regained his senses and knew that he had been ambushed. This dark needle contained a lot of force, so it could sink into his arm in an instant. However, how could it attack him silently? He could only say that he had been too careless. General Chu was shocked when he thought of this. He looked at Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi, only to see the two of them laughing with contempt and mockery. It was an eyesore to him. General Chu finally realized that he had been tricked. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi had purposely lured him down the tower to distract him. Long Fei Ye's injury was intentional, and Han Yunxi's arrogance was also faked. Despicable. He immediately gave up on attacking Long Fei Yi and hurriedly stepped on a driving arrow archer to fly up the tower. The other driving arrow archers continued to attack Long Fei Yi and the others. However, without General Chu's arrows, Long Fei Yi had a much easier time. Even though his arm was injured, he could still move freely. In addition, Tang Li was hiding at the side and constantly attacking the driving arrow archers, forcing them to retreat in the end. Long Fei Yi quickly landed on the ground and wanted to jump up again. However, Han Yunxi stopped him and said seriously, "Don't move. Your injury must be treated immediately, or else it will be very troublesome. No one can cure General Chu's poison except for me. Don't worry." How could Han Yunxi not be worried about Long Fei Ye's injury? She had just cooperated with Long Fei Yi to lure General Chu down, so she had let Tang Li, who was hiding at the side, take action. She was the one who gave Tang Li the hidden needle, so it was naturally dipped in poison. The hidden needle's material and constitution were limited, so the poison wouldn't be fatal, but it was enough to make General Chu suffer. Long Fei Yi originally wanted to attack, but when he saw Han Yunxi's anxious and serious expression, the corners of his mouth twitched as if he wanted to laugh, but he held it in. He didn't wait for Han Yunxi to say more and sat down on the ground. Han Yunxi quickly took out gauze and medicinal ingredients to treat his wound. Han Yunxi had studied the Chu clan's arrows before and knew that the arrows used by their archers were specially made. Judging from the shape of the arrowheads, it would be very difficult to heal a wound. Long Fei Ye's hand couldn't be injured. With the situation so chaotic, there'd be many things to do later. Just like that, while the two armies fought fiercely, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi sat below the city gates as if no one else was around to treat their wounds. Han Yunxi's gaze was focused and serious, like a little old woman. She was meticulous as she treated the wound. Meanwhile, Long Fei Yi watched Han Yunxi's movements with hooded eyelids. His face was expressionless, but the corners of his lips were curled up into a half-smile. He was in a good mood. Tang Li and Chu Shifeng stood guard on the side, feeling helpless. Was this the Duke of Qin's first time leading troops into battle? In any case, neither of them believed it, much less anyone else. But this really was Long Fei Ye's first time leading troops into battle. He'd actually fought his way to the enemy's gates to treat his wounds. If this matter were to spread out, General Chu would probably lose all his face. Currently, General Chu had no time to worry about such things. Tang Li's poison needle had made his entire arm feel like it was being bitten by ants. The itch was unbearable, and the pain was unbearable. He had trouble holding an arrow, much less shooting one. He had already handed over all military affairs to his deputy generals and returned to his tent with Chu Yuni to treat his wounds. Unfortunately, the army's doctors and poison specialists had no way to treat the two brothers' poisons. They couldn't even tell what kind of poison it was. All they could do was numb General Chu's arm to lessen the pain and itch, making him feel better. That was fine, but after the numbness, General Chu couldn't even pick up an arrow with his right hand. That was probably the worst part of all. Chu Tianyin had fallen into Long Fei Ye's hands, while Chu Yuni was already blind in one eye. If General Chu's arm was crippled as well, then the Nether clan would truly be without a leader. General Chu was terrified that his arm would be crippled. He clenched his fist and slammed it against the wall in agony. He was about to lose all reason. Han Yunshi, it was that slut who poisoned me. I'm going to kill her. Kill her. General Chu probably hated Han Yunshi even more than his own daughter, Chu Qingge. Unfortunately, there was no such thing as a greater hatred. That was because Han Yunshi's next actions made his heart feel like it was about to explode. Things had been going well for them below the city walls. The 50,000 soldiers had completely suppressed Long Fei Ye's 5,000 elite troops, but Han Yunshi helped Long Fei Ye treat his wounds before joining forces with the Duke of Qin to kill the enemy. The Duke of Qin didn't make a move himself, but Han Yunshi did. Soon enough, she'd poisoned multiple archers on the city walls. Weren't those two treating their wounds below the city walls? Why did they kill the enemy together? If the Duke of Qin didn't make a move, how could Han Yunshi? Chapter 601. The Duke of Qin didn't make a move, so why would Han Yunshi make a move? Things went like this. After Han Yunshi helped Long Fei Yi treat the wound on his arm, she glanced at the intense battlefield. With just one glance, Long Fei Yi knew that she wanted to participate in the battle. He had previously agreed to bring her to the battlefield. What was the point of watching from the sidelines while injured? Thus, Long Fei grabbed her by the waist without a word and flew over. Long Fei Yi, your hand can't. Before Han Yunshi could finish speaking, Long Fei Yi interrupted her. My hand will never be injured while hugging you. Don't worry. She didn't know what expression he had when he said that, but Han Yunshi heard that his voice was a little awkward, causing her face to heat up. She took a closer look and realized that Long Fei Yi was hugging her with his right hand. The arrow wound was on his left hand. His left hand wasn't holding a sword, but was resting behind his back. Using your needle as Ben Wang's sword, can you do it? Long Fei Yi asked seriously. Han Yunshi immediately understood what he meant. I can do it. Thus, Long Fei Yi really didn't make a move. He just hugged Han Yunshi and shuttled through the army, weaving through the rain of arrows. Long Fei Yi didn't use his sword to block the arrows, but he could use Qinggong to dodge the sharp arrows. How could his ability be limited to dodging? He hugged Han Yunshi and dodged while looking for the best position for Han Yunshi to shoot the poison needles. Although Han Yunshi only knew how to use hidden weapons, she was very, very weak in the face of an entire city tower full of expert archers. However, with Long Fei Yi carrying her, she didn't need to look for an opportunity to shoot the hidden weapons. She only needed to use Pear Blossom Teardrop Rain to shoot the hidden needles after Long Fei Yi found the right opportunity. Long Fei had found an opportunity. The power of pear blossom teardrop rain hit the Imperial Archer's arm without missing a target. Han Yunxi's poison needles were also very clever. A small needle wouldn't take a person's life, but it could numb an archer's arm, making him unable to pick up an arrow again. Could a driving archer still be called a driving archer if he couldn't pick up an arrow? He was just a piece of trash with no combat ability to speak of. There were many archers on the city gate. Long Fei and Han Yunxi specifically targeted the archers who only had arrows and did not have bows. It didn't take long for them to be crippled. A single driving archer was equivalent to 10 archers, so they were basically killing 1 to 10. This reduced the pressure on the soldiers below the city walls. This battle could be said to be the most exciting battle that Han Yunxi had ever fought in her life. It was also the most satisfying battle she had ever fought. If she and Long Fei worked together, they were a perfect match. She was finally no longer depressed that she didn't know martial arts. With Long Fei around, martial arts became something that could be replaced. Han Yunxi was having a great time fighting, but General Chu was on the verge of tears. The soldiers kept coming in to report, "General, we've lost another 3 driving archers." "General, Han Yunxi used poison needles. 10 driving archers have 1 arm crippled and can't even lift it." "General, we've crippled another 3. What do we do?" Less than an hour later, the Deputy General personally came in to report, "General, half of the archers on the western wall have been crippled." When these words came out, General Chu couldn't take it anymore. What? They didn't even let the archers off. At first, they only targeted the driving archers. Later on, this subordinate ordered the driving archers to focus their efforts on killing the 2 of them. Who knew? Who knew that they would anger the Duke of Qin? The Deputy General had an innocent expression. And then? General Chu angrily questioned. The Duke of Qin deployed a team of crossbow archers from somewhere to deal with the archers on the city walls. Their arrows seemed to be specially made, so their power and accuracy were far superior to ours. More importantly, they were all coated in poison. Thus, as long as they hit, even if they didn't have any vital points, they'd be crippled. Soon enough, half of our forces were wiped out. The Deputy General was helpless. This was the first time he'd seen someone use poison on the battlefield after so many years of fighting. He really wanted to know where Han Yunxi had gotten so much poison to coat her arrows. Damned Han Yunxi. General Chu wished he could kill that woman. On one side, Chu Yuni muttered to himself, "The Tang clan. Those arrows must have come from the Tang clan." He remembered that Chu Tianyin had once mentioned that the young master of the Tang clan had a close relationship with Long Fei. If the Tang clan really did provide them with crossbow arrows, then they were far superior to their own. With the help of the Tang clan's assassination weapons, Long Fei was like a tiger that had grown wings. "General, now that the Duke of Qin and Qin Wangfei are targeting driving arrow archers, the crossbow archers are aiming at our archers. We don't have any advantage in archery. If this goes on, we'll suffer disastrous losses. In this general's humble opinion, we should withdraw our archers." Once the archers were gone, the foot soldiers below the city walls would lose support from the walls, making it harder for them to end the battle quickly. Moreover, General Chu couldn't swallow his anger. "We won't withdraw," he roared. "Thousands of archers and 3,000 crossbow archers can't deal with them. I refuse to believe it. Pass down my orders, no matter if they're driving arrow archers or archers, they're all to target Han Yunxi. Kill them all." General Chu's orders put pressure on Long Fei and Han Yunxi. After all, no matter how strong they were no match for thousands of arrows. Still, the sight of the couple darting through the rain of arrows left a deep impression in everyone's minds. Although the outcome wasn't decided yet, In a sense, the Duke of Qin and his wife had already won. Facing the concentrated rain of arrows, Han Yunxi and Long Feiyi didn't retreat. Under the cover of the crossbow archers, they fought guerrilla warfare with the archers on the city walls. They focused on defense and occasionally found an opportunity to launch a surprise attack. Because they didn't retreat, the archers didn't dare to lower their guard and didn't care about the battlefield below the city walls. Long Feiyi's 5,000 elite soldiers below the city walls were relieved of a lot of pressure. However, this was only to reduce the pressure on them. In the end, 5,000 people were no match for 50,000 people. After another hour, both sides suffered heavy casualties. Long Feiyi's 5,000 soldiers couldn't afford to waste time, but the Chu clan's army could. Even if they lost 5,000 soldiers, they still had 40,000 soldiers and could still suppress Long Feiyi. Long Feiyi wasn't an idiot, nor was he arrogant. He wouldn't be so ignorant as to fight 50,000 with 5,000. His only goal today was to stall for time. He wanted to stall for time until Western Zhou's army and Zhongnan's army captured Yuyun and Yaoshui prefectures and came to reinforce them. Seeing that he had stalled for enough time, Long Feiyi immediately ordered the troops to retreat. Hearing this, General Chu heaved a sigh of relief. He immediately ordered, "Retreat and close the city gates. Leave 3,000 soldiers to guard the city gates. Everyone else, head north to reinforce Yuyun Prefecture." Although they hadn't beaten Long Feiyi to the point of admitting defeat, they had beaten Long Feiyi to the point where they didn't have any more soldiers to attack Fenglin Prefecture. He could finally move his troops north without worry. Soon, the deputy general reported the numbers. "General, we've lost 1,000 archers and 5,000 infantry. Long Feiyi's 5,000 elite soldiers are estimated to only have 2,000 left. And we've lost a day's time." General Chu added unhappily. The only thing he was thankful for was that he hadn't received any news of Yuyun Prefecture's fall. It seemed like he could still make it if he rushed there overnight. Unexpectedly, just as he arranged for 3,000 soldiers to guard the city gates and made all the preparations to move north without telling Long Feiyi, the deputy general scrambled into the tent and shouted, "General! General! Something bad has happened! Something bad has happened!" General Chu was applying anesthetic to his arm to stop the pain. Seeing the deputy general's panicked appearance, he was incomparably annoyed and simply ignored him. Not only were they unable to defeat Long Feiyi's 5,000 elite soldiers with 50,000 soldiers, but they had also wasted a day here. What could possibly happen at this time? Could there be anything worse than this? Unexpectedly, the deputy general's words caused General Chu to stand up in shock. He knocked over the anesthetic in the doctor's hand and forgot about the pain in his arm. The deputy general said, "General, the Duke of Qin has set up camp 1,000 meters away. He has hung the young general in front of the camp. The Duke of Qin said that if we don't surrender for a day, he will cut the young general with his sword." Without a doubt, the Chu clan's young general was Chu Tianyin. Of course, General Chu hadn't forgotten that his son was in Long Feiyi's hands, but if Long Feiyi didn't bring it up, he wouldn't bring it up himself lest he be threatened. Who knew that Long Fei would push Tianyin out at a time like this? The thing he was most afraid of had finally happened. That was his own son, the one he doted on the most. Although the Chu clan had plenty of heirs, there was only one son of the first wife. None of them could compare to Tianin's martial arts skills and talents. General Chu could choose not to fight for the throne with Chu Yuni, but the latter would have to abdicate one day. His precious son was the best candidate for the position. As long as he withdrew his troops now, he could guarantee his son's safety. Faced with such temptation, General Chu couldn't make up his mind and hesitated. Chu Yuni stood on one side, very clear on General Chu's feelings for his son. He also knew that the Chu clan needed a successor now that the two of them were seriously injured. Still, he hesitated as well. Yuyun and Yaoshui prefectures were in dire straits, while Ning Cheng's reinforcements had yet to arrive. If they traded Fenglin Prefecture for Chu Tianin, what would the Chu clan have left? There would be no place left for the Chu clan. Were they really going to attack Tianning's borders? After all, Emperor Tianhui was still breathing. If they entered Tianning now, they wouldn't be able to claim the throne properly. Hadn't they spent so much time and effort to give Chu Qingge a premature birth just so they could claim Tianning's throne? Although they were cooperating with Ning Qing, they still had to be on guard against Ning Qing. Emperor Tianhui was still breathing, while the crown prince had yet to ascend the throne. If they entered Tianning now, Ning Qing might accuse the crown prince and empress of conspiring with the enemy to usurp the throne. Then all their efforts in West Liang would be for naught. Both brothers had their own selfish motives and were considering the interests of their respective clans. They stared at each other for a long time. Finally, General Chu spoke up. "Big bro, you're the clan head. You make the decision." Chu Yuni couldn't help but sigh with emotion. If only Gu Beiyue was still in our hands. "Big bro, when will Ningqing arrive?" General Chu asked. "We agreed that he'd arrive the day after tomorrow. It's only 2 days. I wonder if Tianyin, Chu Yuni wanted to waste time here. If they could hold out for 2 days, Ning Cheng's reinforcements would arrive and catch Long Fei Yi unawares." Chu Yuni had made a concession by abandoning Yuyun Prefecture for Fenglin Prefecture, but Chu Tianyin would have to hold out for 2 days. Then he'd have to suffer 2 stabs from Long Fei Yi. If it was a fatal wound, it'd be enough to kill him. After much consideration, General Chu decided to throw caution to the wind. "Even if Gu Beiyue isn't in our hands, we can still threaten them." Using Gu Beiyue's whereabouts to threaten Han Yunshi would buy Tianyin at least 2 days. Chapter 602. General Chu's suggestion received Chu Yuni's approval. But just as he was about to leave the city for negotiations, a surprising piece of news came to him. "General, there's a report from West Liang that Emperor Tianhui has passed away." "What?" Chu Yuni was stunned. After all, Witch Ant had sent him a letter just a few days ago saying that Emperor Tianhui wouldn't die so easily. How come today? There were a few eunuchs and imperial physicians in Emperor Tianhui's chambers, all of whom belonged to the 4th imperial prince. Witch Ant had never found a chance to make a move against Tianhui. All she could do was wait. When did this happen? General Chu asked hastily. "It takes at least 2 hours for a flying hawk to send a letter." "It should have been 2 hours ago," the attendant reported. "What else did the letter say?" General Chu asked next. "General, there was only a slip of paper from that side, but no letter." "If there was a letter, the attendant would have brought it here long ago." General Chu's heart grew uneasy as he looked towards Chu Yuni. Chu Yuni's eyes flickered between light and darkness. Wait a moment. Witch Ant wasn't so unreliable. She must have sent a report in her panic, so she'd probably send a letter with details soon enough. With Emperor Tianhui gone, Tianning's situation would change drastically as well as the entire western region. But no matter what, it would still be beneficial for them. At this point, they didn't need to rush to expose Gu Beiyue. They had to calm down and figure out the situation before deciding how to deal with the Duke of Qin. Ning Qing should have received the news by now. Noble consort Ning should be making a move as well, Chu Yuni said. As Chu Yuni spoke, he personally wrote a secret letter to Ning Qing, then another to Witch Ant. Immediately, he sent a messenger hawk north to deliver the message. No matter who the letter was, it was a plea for help. Once the crown prince ascended the throne, Empress Chu could rule from behind a curtain and issue military orders to send Tianning's western troops to reinforce the Chu clan troops. There was no need to wait for the Ning clan troops to arrive. Although Tianning didn't have many troops stationed in the west, even a mosquito's leg was meat. The current situation at Yuyun and Yaoshuai was truly urgent. Flying hawks were the fastest way to send letters across Cloud Realm continent, but Chu Yuni still hadn't received a reply from Ning Qing after 4 hours. They did not receive any news from Western capital even when the sun was about to rise. General Chu finally felt uneasy. Could it be that something happened in Western capital? Not really. Tianning's forces in West Liang are enough to oppose the 4th Imperial Prince, much less noble consort Ning. Chu Yuni said seriously. General Chu had a complicated look in his eyes. Although he didn't want to be suspicious, he couldn't help but ask, "Big brother, Ning Qing, could it be?" Before he could finish, Chu Yuni refuted the idea. Impossible. Old man even handed Gu Beiyue over to him. He can't possibly betray the Chu clan at this time. Ning Qing had always been loyal to the Western Qin imperial clan. After Chu Yuni confirmed Ning Cheng's identity, he told Ning Qing that the Western Qin imperial clan hadn't been exterminated and that his daughter had a phoenix birthmark on her back. Ning Qing had been happy for 3 days and 3 nights, praising the Nether clan's schemes over and over again. His loyalty couldn't be faked. He had no reason to refuse to cooperate with the Nether clan, much less trick the Chu clan at a time like this. That wouldn't do him any good in reviving Western Qin. Chu Yuni waited until it was daybreak. But neither Ning Qing nor Witch Ant replied to her letter. General Chu grew uneasy. Big brother, could it be that Ning Qing discovered something? Chu Yuni stared at the map without a word. Meanwhile, Han Yunxi had just woken up in Long Fei Ye's arms. She had no idea that the situation had changed overnight. She remembered that after setting up camp last night, they'd all sat around the fire to discuss matters. As they chatted, she grew tired and somehow fell asleep. By the time she woke up, Tang Li and Chu Shifeng were gone. Only she and Long Fei Yi were left in the tent. Long Fei Yi still didn't know she was awake. He was currently staring at the fire, the flames dancing in his eyes as if his thoughts were unfathomable. Han Yunxi was lying in his arms, so she couldn't see his eyes. She could only see his chin and Adam's apple from this angle. When this man was quiet, he was like a statue carved by the workmanship of the gods. He was so perfect that there wasn't a single flaw. Han Yunxi would never tire of seeing him like this no matter how many times she looked. As she stared and stared, she couldn't help but murmur, "Long Fei Yi, how did I end up running into you?" How did she end up running into him after 3,000 years in a sea of people? How lucky was that? Long Fei Yi finally realized that Han Yunxi was awake. He lowered his head and gently brushed aside her bangs. "What did you say?" "Nothing." It was fine if he didn't hear her words. He probably wouldn't answer her even if she asked. Han Yunxi lazily rose to her feet. Long Fei Yi didn't pursue the matter, but simply said, "Tian Hui has passed away." He was very calm, but Han Yunxi was stunned. "Passed away? When did this happen?" "Last night." Chu Shifeng's already rushed over. "The situation. I'm afraid it's not optimistic," Long Fei Yi replied. Han Yunxi understood the gravity of the situation, which was why she was so shocked. Although they were on the battlefield, they were still keeping an eye on Western Liang's movements. After all, Long Fei Yi had to be on guard against Great General Ning taking control of the capital. Noble consort Ning might be unknown, but that didn't mean she had no power in Western Liang. Thus, Long Fei Yi was not only on guard against Chu Qingge, but noble consort Ning as well. The spies he'd planted in the palace had sent word the day before yesterday that Emperor Tianhui would at least live through the new year. How could he have passed away last night? Someone must have made a move. Han Yunxi was certain. As soon as she finished speaking, Tang Li suddenly rushed in with a startled cry. Big bro! We've been tricked. Great General Ning didn't send troops to the 3 eastern prefectures at all. His 2 main armies have long headed south. He even sent half of his cavalry troops to the east on the road. It looks like he's guarding against Long Tianma. What's the situation in Western Liang? Han Yunxi asked anxiously. Long Feiyi and Ning Qing had agreed to unite the 3 armies while he and Emperor Kong Qing had sent troops to the 3 eastern prefectures ahead of time. One of their goals was to suppress the Chu clan, but the other was to lure Ning Chang's troops over. Long Feiyi naturally had to be on guard against Ning Chang's designs on Tianning. Long Feiyi had taken precautions in Western Liang as well. It wasn't surprising that Ning Qing would send troops to Western Liang. Right now, he was only mobilizing his troops. He hadn't taken control of West Liang yet, so Han Yunxi was most concerned about the situation there. Tang Li's face was full of anxiety. Chu Qingge and noble consort Ning are colluding. Even Long Feiyi was surprised by the news. Really? He asked coldly. Absolutely. Big bro, those 2 women can't be underestimated. With the 2 of them working together in the Ning clan's troops, our men won't be able to control Western Liang, Tang Li said helplessly. How could that be? Since they're in cahoots, Ning Qing should send reinforcements to the Chu clan. Han Yunxi didn't understand. Ning Qing had so many troops under his command, but he hadn't sent a single one here. All of them were stationed within Tianning's borders. How was he supposed to cooperate with the Chu clan? Chu Qingge had even more power than noble consort Ning in Western Liang. Would she be willing to be controlled by the Ning clan? Would she just watch as General Chu was trapped in the 3 eastern prefectures? Long Feiyi had focused all his efforts on the 3 eastern prefectures just to wait for Ning Cheng's arrival. I don't get it either. But that's what Chu Shifeng reported. He wouldn't make a mistake. Tang Li said seriously. At this moment, Long Feiyi spoke up. Chu Qingge betrayed the Chu clan to rely on Ning Qing. Chu Yuni was tricked as well. This, Han Yunxi didn't dare to believe it, but Long Feiyi's conjectures cleared up all their doubts. Chu Yuni was still foolishly waiting for Ning Chang's reinforcements. They were waiting for Ning Qing to send reinforcements as well, but Ning Qing had hooked up with Chu Qingge and worked with her from the inside. He'd effortlessly taken control of Western Liang and Tianning as well. In other words, Ning Chang's 2 armies weren't sent to Western Liang, but south to guard against the Chu clan and us. Han Yunxi finally understood everything. There was only one way for the Ning clan troops to head south. It would take less than a day to reach the border between Tianning and the 3 eastern prefectures if they headed west. If they headed east, they would quickly reach Suzi Pass. Once they gained control of Suzi Pass, they would also gain control of Western Capital's southwestern defense line. Ning Cheng had left Western Liang in Chu Qingge and noble consort Ning's hands while he sent troops east and west to set up defenses. He didn't want to provoke Long Feiyi, nor save the Chu clan troops. He wanted to dominate Tianning alone. How despicable. Big bro, what do we need the 3 eastern prefectures for? Send reinforcements there immediately. Let's have the Bailey army send out troops as well. If we take the water route from Yaoshuwei, the mermaid soldiers will reach Western Liang within days. We'll use the marines to catch them off guard. Tang Li was very excited. But Long Feiyi only glared at him coldly. Tang Li wasn't excited at all, but impulsive. The mermaid soldiers were Long Feiyi's trump card. How could they be exposed so easily? Tang Li felt resentful at the glare and didn't dare to speak again. Long Fei Ye's eyes flashed with cold light. Although he didn't show his emotions on his face, it was obvious that he was unhappy inside. He'd calculated everything, but never expected Chu Qingge to betray the Chu clan or Ning Qing to hook up with her. This was the first time in his life that he'd failed at Ning Chang's hands. Even if he gave up on the 3 eastern prefectures and sent reinforcements now, it was already too late. Long Fei Ye's face was gloomy, while Han Yunxi's expression wasn't any better. She said hatefully, "I really underestimated that woman, Chu Qingge. If Chu Qingge hadn't betrayed the Chu clan this time, Ning Qing wouldn't have been able to take over Western Liang so easily no matter how capable he was." In the end, Chu Qingge was the key. At this moment, a guard arrived with Chu Shifeng's latest letter. Long Fei Yi opened it and glanced at it before handing it to Han Yunxi. It said that Ning Qing had set up 10 or so redcoat cannons on Tianning's eastern front to keep Long Tianma in check. These cannons had to come from Cloud Realm Trade Consortium, which meant that there was no need to doubt Ning Cheng's identity as a member of the D clan's Ning clan. Han Yunxi and Tang Li were both unreconciled. They were waiting for Long Fei Yi to send reinforcements to save the day. Long Fei Ye's face was expressionless, making it impossible to tell whether he was angry or unwilling. His emotions were hard to read. Cold, he instructed Tang Li, "Go urge Chu Yuni. Tell him that your lordship will give him 10 days to think things over. If he doesn't surrender by then, your lordship's first strike will land on Chu Tianning's hand." Chapter 603. 10 days later, Yoyun's troops headed south, Yao Shui's troops headed north, and Ning Cheng's troops came from the west. The Chu clan had neither reinforcements nor a path of retreat. It was a time of despair. Long Fei Ye's words were both a threat and an invitation to surrender. "You want to swallow up the Chu clan's military strength?" Han Yunxi asked doubtfully. Ning Qing had tricked the Chu clan into a corner. If Long Fei Yi used Chu Tianyin as a hostage to force the Chu clan to surrender, perhaps the Long Fei Yi really could use the Chu clan to his advantage. After all, the Chu clan's driving arrow squad could fight against 10 men each. If he could take them under his command, their military strength would be on a completely different level. Yes, Long Fei Yi admitted. In terms of wealth, he might not lose to the Ning clan, but military strength was his weakness. It was time for him to train his troops and expand his armaments. Although the overall situation was set in stone, this was only the end of one game. Another would soon begin, and in this game, his only opponent would be the D clan's Ning Qing. Tang Li rejoiced at the turn of events. He was about to leave when Han Yunxi added, "While you're at it, tell General Chu that if he doesn't surrender, this Wang Fei will guarantee that he'll never be able to pick up an arrow again." In other words, if General Chu surrendered, Han Yunxi could heal his hand. Her style was the same as Long Fei Ye's, combining kindness and severity. Tang Li looked at Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi and couldn't help but wonder why he never realized these two were such a good match. Tang Li quickly left. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi could only wait for developments in Western Liang and news from the Chu clan. What would the Chu clan choose? Han Yunxi thought that Chu Yuni's character was far from loyal. He was just using the Western Qin imperial clan as a cover to deceive the world. After weighing the pros and cons, he could only choose to surrender. Thinking of this, the word bet appeared in Han Yunxi's mind. She finally remembered the bet she made with Long Fei Yi. They were betting on Ning Cheng's identity. She slowly turned her head to look at Long Fei Yi. This guy seems to have lost. No, it's not that he seems to have lost, he really did lose. If he lost, he would have to hug the little thing. No one knew what Long Fei Yi was thinking at this moment. He was staring at the door in a daze. Han Yunxi was clearly the winner. She could have won confidently and confidently. Unfortunately, when facing Long Fei Yi, she was always a little afraid. She coughed a few times and opened the topic. Long Fei Yi, what is noble consort Ning's name? Ning and Long Fei Yi replied offhandedly. So it turns out. Han Yunxi sighed with emotion. The executive council head who replaced Ouyang Ningnuo was called Ouyang Ningjing. Ning and Ningjing is also called Enjing. What an interesting name. Han Yunxi assumed that Long Fei would bring up Ningqing and Ningnuo's names, but he only gave an without any intention to chat. Han Yunxi scooted over to sit by his side. Ningqing and Ouyang Ningnuo are interesting names as well. Ningqing and Ningnuo make a promise when combined. Hey, why didn't we think of that before? Cloud Realm Trade Consortium and Great General Ning's estate were merchant families and military families respectively. They had never had any contact with each other, so who would be so bored as to put their names together? Long Fei Yi remained expressionless as he ignored her. Han Yunxi scooted closer and cocked her head at him. So Ning Cheng is a member of the D clan. Long Fei Yi was still expressionless. Han Yunxi was puzzled. This guy isn't reacting at all. Did he forget about our bet? He said he'd have to hug Lil Thing if he lost. Han Yunxi waited for a while, but when she saw that Long Fei Yi still wasn't going to bring up the bet, she simply said, Long Fei Yi, let's make a bet. You lost, so you have to fulfill your end of the bargain. Long Fei Yi's lips twitched. Actually, he knew what Han Yunxi was up to as soon as she asked for noble consort Ning's name. He was in a foul mood after being checkmated by Ning Qing. Any sensible person would know to keep their distance from him at a time like this. This woman, on the other hand, had forced her way to him. Long Fei Yi turned around and asked coldly, Han Yunxi, this is the first time I've lost in my life. Aren't you afraid that I'll get angry? Unexpectedly, Han Yunxi replied, do you mean you lost to me, or to Ning Qing? Long Fei Yi's face darkened instantly. He stared at Han Yunxi without saying a word. However, Han Yunxi wasn't afraid at all. Instead, she had the urge to laugh when she saw his expression. Fortunately, she restrained herself. She didn't dare to mention Ning Qing again and hurriedly summoned Lil Thing out of the poison storage space. Then, she pretended to take it out of her sleeve and held it in front of Long Fei Yi. We agreed that you'd have to hug it. If the person in front of him wasn't Han Yunxi, but anyone else, Long Fei Yi would have sent them flying with a kick. But he only looked down at Lil Thing. Ever since Lil Thing had entered the poison storage space to drink the poison water, it had often fallen asleep after eating too much. Unless Mama Yunxi called it, it rarely woke up. It had already activated the mode of eating, sleeping, and eating mode. Only in this way could it recover quickly. It also hoped that it could recover faster, not only from the poison in its teeth, but also from the detoxification of its blood. Then it could be like the gentleman and have the ability to protect Mama Yunxi. Right now, it was in a daze, about to wake up. It lazily turned over with its 4 feet in the air, twisted its body, and stretched its limbs. Then, it opened its eyes as it stretched lazily. This face is so familiar. Lil Thing had been sleeping for days, so it couldn't wake up immediately. It rubbed its eyes with its paws before taking a closer look. The face was incomparably handsome with perfect features. There were no blind spots at all, as if the heavens had carved it out with care. It was a handsome face, but his expression wasn't very good. It was too cold, especially those eyes. There wasn't a trace of warmth in them. Lil Thing kept rubbing its eyes as it studied the face. The more it looked, the more familiar it felt, as if it had seen this face before. Suddenly, it stopped rubbing its paws and widened its eyes to take a closer look. His Highness Duke of Qin. Cheap, Lil Thing had finally woken up. Or rather, its 7 souls and 6 spirits had all awakened. Its white fur stood on end like it was about to explode, each strand trembling. Oh whoa, why is it like this? Lil Thing reflexively wanted to escape, but it was too late. Long Fei Ye's hands were much faster and he'd already grabbed its tail. Long Fei Ye hated shrill cries like these. He grabbed Lil Thing by the tail and prepared to throw it out the door. Fortunately, Han Yunshi had the foresight to grab Lil Thing by the neck and ask Long Fei Yi, "What are you doing? Are you going back on your word?" Lil Thing didn't understand what Mama Yunshi was saying, much less the bet between her and Papa Long. What was Mama Yunshi doing? Papa Long had thrown it out so many times, but Mama Yunshi had never stopped him. Was she going to take him seriously this time? Lil Thing's heart began to pound wildly. Actually, it had no idea who would win between Mama Yunshi and Papa Long. Or rather, it had no idea whether Papa Long would yield to Mama Yunshi or not. No matter how they fought, Papa Long would definitely win. If he lost, he'd definitely yield. If Papa Long didn't yield this time, would Mama Yunshi insist? If Mama Yunshi insisted and Papa Long still didn't yield, would the two of them fight? If the two of them quarreled, would it become the culprit? Should it fight against Papa Long for once? Or should it scram on its own accord? Lil Thing quickly fell into an internal struggle while Han Yunshi looked seriously at Long Fei Yi. "You're not allowed to act shamelessly," Han Yunshi reminded him. Long Fei Yi fell silent for a long time before he pursed his lips. "LOU." If it was any other request, he'd satisfy it no matter how difficult it was. But holding a mouse like this, he really was. "You can still owe me." Han Yunshi arched a brow. "LOU." This was probably the first time in Long Fei Ye's life that he'd felt so awkward. He actually let go of Lil Thing. Han Yunshi had long been laughing in her heart. The fact that this guy let go and didn't throw Lil Thing out was already a good start. Actually, she wasn't planning on forcing him. Han Yunshi didn't force him, so Long Fei Yi sat on one side and emphasized, "LOU." Han Yunshi held Lil Thing in her hands and stroked it like a hot water bottle to keep it warm. "Alright, I'll always remember. You're not allowed to act shamelessly." Long Fei Yi couldn't drink the tea he'd just been drinking. He replied in a low voice, "Of course not. Of course not." He'd always kept his word when it came to her. He really hadn't broken his promise, but by the time he'd hugged Lil Thing was no longer Lil Thing. Nor was Han Yunshi the current Han Yunshi. Han Yunshi carried Lil Thing to sit by his side. Long Fei Yi glanced at Lil Thing, but didn't drag it away from Han Yunshi like before. It was as if he'd tacitly allowed Han Yunshi to hold Lil Thing. Since he'd already yielded, Han Yunshi knew when to stop forcing him. As for Lil Thing, it was curled up in Mama Yunshi's arms, full of doubts. "Heavens, I've only slept for a few days, but Papa Long's doting on Mama Yunshi has already reached a heaven-defying level." They didn't even fight, but Mama Yunshi's one move made Papa Long keep it. She even tacitly allowed it to cling to her body. After all, this was something it'd never dared to hope for or imagine. Could it be that I've missed something in the past few days? Could it be that something had happened between the two of them these past few days? Lil Thing carefully raised its head and stole a glance at Papa Long. Although Papa Long hadn't chased it away, his cold face was still hard to frighten. If it got too close to him, it'd get frostbitten. Lil Thing struggled out of Mama Yunshi's arms and slipped into her sleeve to hide. It sighed softly in its heart. No matter how it looked at it, the gentleman was still the most comfortable. "I wonder where the gentleman is now." It's so cold, I miss his warm voice and warm smile. Gentlemen, where are you? Lil Thing misses you. Chapter 604. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi were waiting for the Chu clan to make a decision. Meanwhile, Chu Yuni and General Chu had just received news from Western Liang that Chu Qingge had colluded with Ning Qing and betrayed the Chu clan. Both Chu Yuni and General Chu were filled with sudden enlightenment as their rage soared to the skies. If Chu Qingge was in front of them right now, they wouldn't be able to vent their anger even if they killed her 100 times over. That wicked girl. She's ruined everything Tianyin worked so hard for. Ruined. Old man's going to kill her. He's going to kill her with his own hands. I never expected our nether clan's Chu clan to have such a traitor as well. Unforgivable. The two of them paced around the tent, unable to calm down for a long time. After all, they'd only exposed themselves at Thousand Buddha Cave and mobilized their troops to rebel because they discussed this with Ning Qing. It was all because they had the support of Ning Qing and Tianning country. Otherwise, the Chu clan wouldn't have been so impulsive without sufficient preparations. Nor would they have fought with their backs to the wall. Now that Ning Qing hadn't sent any troops, the Chu clan had yet to claim the throne of Tianning country. All they had were the 3 eastern prefectures. Moreover, Yuyun and Yaoshui were on the verge of being conquered. How were they supposed to fight against the Duke of Qin and Emperor Kongqing? They'd really been tricked by Ning Qing and forced into a corner by Long Fei Yi. I told you long ago that Ning Qing couldn't be relied on. You just had to. If you hadn't handed Gu Beiwei over to him, we'd at least have a bargaining chip. But now... General Chu couldn't help but vent his discontent. Chu Yuni still refused to believe that he'd made a mistake in his judgment. Ning Qing. Ning Qing, big bro, you still can't tell what Ning Qing's ambitions are. We want to borrow Western Qin's name to conquer the world, but Ning Qing doesn't. Don't forget that his D clan has the power to fight for the world. His D clan's wealth and military strength are enough to contend with any nation in Cloud Realm continent. All of our efforts in Tianning have gone to his aid. General Chu said angrily. Hearing this, Chu Yuni finally came to his senses. After all, the Chu clan's original plan was to use Tianning as a stronghold to develop their power while searching for the orphans of Western Qin's imperial clan and roping in other nobles. They didn't want to expose the fiend's secret so soon. However, they were forced by Long Fei Yi to reveal their secrets. Since the outbreak of the war, the situation had long been out of their control, and all of their decisions had gone against their original intentions. Now that Chu Yuni had calmed down and thought back, he realized that ever since Long Fei Yi had left for Western Zhou, he'd been incited into making decisions on impulse. He couldn't help but ask himself, how could this be? Now that he reflected on it, it was already too late. In the end, it's all Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi's fault. General Chu was so angry that he was panting. Chu Yuni's anger was all bottled up in his heart. In a low voice, he said, "There's no point in talking now. Let's think of a countermeasure instead." At this moment, the military reports from Yuyun and Yaoshui arrived. General Chu knew that the 2 cities would be lost at this time, but when he saw the news, his heart still thumped loudly. He tossed the reports to Chu Yuni and said, "Countermeasure. We've been surrounded in all 4 directions. Besides abandoning this city, what else do we have? When it rains, it pours." Just as Chu Yuni and General Chu were at their wits' end, they received letters from Long Fei Yi and Ning Qing at the same time. Both brothers read the letters together, but their faces were darker than the others. Long Fei Yi had taken Chu Tianyin as a hostage and given them 10 days to think things over. He wanted them to surrender, which was both a threat and an invitation. Ning Cheng had given them 10 days to surrender as well. However, Ning Cheng's conditions were that if they were willing to surrender, he was willing to exchange Gu Beiwei with Long Fei Yi for Tianyin. This was both a threat and an invitation to surrender. Ning Cheng hadn't said it so clearly, but they should have understood. Alright, here was their choice. Faced with such a choice, Chu Yuni and General Chu both calmed down. They exchanged glances, but neither of them spoke first. Long Fei Yi and Ning Cheng had both given them 10 days. Without a doubt, many things would happen within those 10 days. The two brothers fell silent for a long time before Chu Yuni finally said, "Think it over carefully." Then he left the tent, leaving General Chu to massage his aching arm and fall into deep thought. 10 days passed quickly. On the third day, soldiers from Yaoshui and Yuyun prefectures arrived from the north and south to join forces with Long Fei Ye's elite troops to surround Fenglin prefecture from the north, south, and west. On the fifth day, Ning Cheng's troops arrived to join forces with the 3 elite troops stationed at Tianning's western borders to surround Fenglin prefecture's east. On the seventh day, Emperor Tianhui's first 7 days passed. On the 8th day, Chu Qingge carried the crown prince, who was still a month old, to the throne with the title of Eternal Light. Empress Chu was promoted to Empress Dowager and held court from behind a curtain. Ning Cheng was conferred the title of Prince Regent with the title of Prince Regent. That very day, the Prince Regent led all of the civil and military officials in kneeling and swearing loyalty to Tianning and Eternal Light. Today was the 9th day. After 9 days of silence, Chu Yuni and General Chu finally summoned all of the Nether clan elders and strategists to discuss a way out. However, even now, the two of them had kept their mouths shut. The elders and strategists, on the other hand, were talking about the wind and the clouds, and even began to argue. Ning Cheng can't be trusted. Are we supposed to stick our faces to him after being tricked once? What a joke. Does the Duke of Qin have any credibility at all? Don't forget, the Nether clan's driving arrow arts are known to all because of the Duke of Qin. Ning Cheng just wants to take control this time. As I see it, the Chu clan should keep cooperating with Ning Cheng. After all, half of Tianning's crown prince's blood flows in his veins. Are you sure Gu Beiwei can be traded for Chu Tianyin? You're indulging in wild fantasies. He's just a trifling doctor. Gu Beiwei was originally our Chu clan's bargaining chip, but now he's in Ning Cheng's hands. Now he's a bargaining chip for our Chu clan to surrender. Ha ha ha. Clan head, where will my Nether clan's Chu clan hide its face now? Hearing this, Chu Yuni and General Chu remained silent. One knitted his brows, the other wore a heavy expression. No matter whether it's the Duke of Qin or Ning Cheng, all they want is our Chu clan's driving arrow unit. Whether we surrender or not, they'll never let the young general off. We'll be tied down for the rest of our lives. As I see it, we should just abandon this city. With the Chu clan's strength, escaping is as easy as turning over a hand. Are some people thinking of becoming deserters? That's inappropriate. If we offend 3 parties at once, it'll be hard for the Chu clan to gain a foothold in Cloud Realm Continent. As I see it, we should surrender to the Ning clan. After all, we still have their secrets in our hands. The Ning clan really doesn't mind exposing the D clan's secrets, does it? As I see it, this won't affect Ning Cheng much at all. Are we supposed to surrender to the Duke of Qin? How can he beat the Ning clan with his wealth and military strength? As the discussions went on, the smell of gunpowder grew thicker and thicker. Finally, Chu Yuni slammed his palm against the table, silencing everyone. Chu Yuni glanced at General Chu and asked, "What do you think?" General Chu looked at the crowd before he said seriously, "Let's not consider abandoning the city. It's not that old man wants to save Tianyin out of selfishness, but that the Chu clan is surrounded by enemies on all sides. Everyone knows what's going on. With the Chu clan's skills, the Duke of Qin and Duke of Ning's encirclement was still within their capabilities. But as soon as they fled, they'd offend both Western Zhou and the Duke of Qin. The Chu clan troops had fought with Northernly multiple times and had long become a thorn in the latter's side. Meanwhile, in Tianan country, Long Tianma and the Chu clan were like fire and water. Medicine City was in the Duke of Qin's hands, while Carefree City and the City of Daughters only recognized money. As for Medical City, head Elder Ling was still in Western Liang. It was likely that Ning Qing and Chu Qingge had bribed him long ago. As for Celestial Mountain, not to mention the fact that Celestial Mountain never interfered in worldly affairs, even if Celestial Mountain did meddle in worldly affairs, they would not be on good terms with the Chu clan. After all, the mother of the Celestial Mountain Sword Sect's most beloved disciple, Duan Muyao, was in their hands. The Chu clan had offended all of Cloud Realm Continent's major powers. If they didn't choose between the Duke of Qin and the Duke of Ning, then the Chu clan would become the target of public criticism without a place to stand. How tragic and terrible it was. If they hadn't provoked Long Fei Yi, they wouldn't have fallen into Ning Chang's trap. The Chu clan wouldn't have fallen into such dire straits either. In the end, General Chu hated Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi the most. Seeing no one speak, he stood up and said coldly, since my Chu clan still has a choice, then we still have a bargaining chip. As old man sees it, it's better to let the Duke of Qin and the Duke of Ning fight it out instead of making a choice. My Chu clan will be the fisherman who reaps the benefits. Everyone fell silent at General Chu's words. General Chu was right. Now that the Duke of Qin and the Duke of Ning were fighting over the Chu clan could use this chance to raise its status. Why hadn't anyone thought of that after all these days of consideration? General Chu lived up to his name. He was still so confident even at a time like this. Everyone quickly praised him. Finally, the heavy hearts of the crowd breathed a sigh of relief. Chu Yuni had the same thoughts as General Chu. His public praise of General Chu gave everyone a glimmer of hope. That very day, General Chu personally wrote back to the Duke of Qin and the Duke of Ning, telling them all of their conditions for the Chu clan. When Ning Qing received General Chu's letter, he saw through the man's intentions at a glance. After being conferred the title of king, he was in high spirits. Dressed in a white robe, he looked extraordinarily noble. At this moment, he was sitting on the spacious dragon throne in the imperial study with his legs crossed, as if he was the monarch of a country. Chu Qingge, the Empress Dowager who sat behind the curtains, was sitting on one side. Ning Qing casually tossed the letter to Chu Qingge and mocked, "Your father's so greedy." Chu Qingge glanced at the letter and knew what was going on. She smiled coldly and said, "Ning Qing, you'll lose this time. Do you understand your father too well? Or?" As Ning Qing spoke, his lips curled into a mocking smile. "Or, did you overestimate the Duke of Qin?" He'd already found out from which aunt that Chu Qingge liked Long Fei Yi. He'd never worked with a woman before, so this was his first time. Naturally, he wanted to understand her thoroughly. Ning Chang's mockery was an eyesore to Chu Qingge. She hated people who looked down on her feelings for Long Fei Yi more than anything else. She raged, "I'm only judging the matter as it stands. You can't win against the Duke of Qin. I've already won once." Ning Chang's face was indifferent, as if he didn't care what Chu Qingge thought of him. But Chu Qingge's next words made him lose his cool. Chapter 605. Chu Qingge's lips quirked up into a mocking smile. "Ning Qing, you didn't win. You lost. With your military strength, you could have kept Tianhui in check during Tianning Civil War a year ago and taken control of the country. You've fought with the Duke of Qin until now, but all you've gained is what you could have gotten a year ago. You can't even take over the 3 eastern prefectures. Do you think you've won? It had to be said that her words had kicked Ning Qing in the heart and hit his sore spot. He was an intelligent man. Even without Chu Qingge's reminder, he knew that Long Fei Ye's first round didn't count as a true victory. At most, he'd messed up Long Fei Ye's plans. Even now, he couldn't tell what Long Fei Ye was planning. With his Ning clan strength, he could have taken control of Tianning's western regions a year ago. But with Long Fei's power in Tianning, he could have taken control of the entire region a year ago. But Long Fei Ye hadn't done that. He hadn't even declared himself emperor in the south-central regions. Ning Qing couldn't figure out why. Annoyed by Chu Qingge's words, Ning Qing stood up and drew close to her with his tall, sturdy frame, giving Chu Qingge an oppressive feeling. This time, your lordship is definitely taking over the Chu clan. Ning Qing said cold. I don't care if you win or lose. In any case, don't forget what you promised me. Chu Qingge reminded him. Rather than exchange Gu Beiyue for the Chu clan, you might as well exchange him for Han Yunxi. Ning Qing, if you want to beat Long Fei Yi, you have to start with Han Yunxi. Otherwise, even if you have the Chu clan's troops, you won't be able to beat him. Boom! Ning Qing suddenly punched the table next to Chu Qingge. Don't be so absolute in front of your lordship. You won't be able to bear the consequences. He had taken over the position of D clan head at the age of 14. Since then, no one had dared to utter the word lose in front of him. Today, Chu Qingge had once again crossed his bottom line. If it wasn't for the fact that she was still useful to him, he would have sewn her mouth shut long ago. Frightened, Chu Qingge couldn't speak for a while. She watched as Ning Qing walked out the door before recovering her wits. The hatred in her heart gave her great courage. She chased after Ning Qing and stood in front of him. Ning Qing, you're a dignified man. Are you going to break your promise to a weak woman like me? You promised me that you would help me deal with Han Yunxi after this matter is settled. What's the hurry? It's not over yet. Your lordship won't give way to the Chu clan. Han Yunxi, your lordship will bring her to you as well. Ning Chang's face was cold. Now, get out of my way. Chu Qingge still wouldn't budge. Ning Chang's gaze turned cold as he raised a hand. He never touched women, so he didn't touch Chu Qingge this time either. Still, a strong, domineering aura sent Chu Qingge tumbling to the ground. By the time Chu Qingge hit the ground, Ning Qing was long gone. Women are so annoying, especially women like Chu Qingge. Ning Qing couldn't figure out why a woman like Long Fei Yi would like her. From what he understood, that woman called Han Yunxi liked Long Fei Yi very much as well. She'd even gotten off her sedan chair to visit him on their wedding day. Although Han Yunxi was quite famous, birds of a feather flocked together. Most likely, all the women who liked Long Fei Yi were similar. Last time they met, she'd been staring at him non-stop. He hated such things the most. If not for his status, he would have shot her a glare long ago. Ning Qing hesitated before ordering someone to send a letter back to the Chu clan. He didn't express any opinions on Long Fei Ye's request for the Chu clan to surrender, but only warned Chu Yuni that if the Chu clan didn't surrender by tomorrow night, he'd send troops to destroy them. When Ning Qing received General Chu's letter, so did Long Fei Yi. When Long Fei Yi saw the words Gu Beiyue, he looked calm, but a complicated look flashed past his eyes. The fake Han Yunxi he'd met at Thousand Buddha Cave had told him that the Shadow Clan man had made a move there. Long Fei had no idea how or why the Shadow Clan fellow and Chu Yuni had started fighting at the Thousand Buddha Cave. He was only certain that the bearded man Chu Yuni had taken away was the Shadow Clan man. He'd always harbored suspicions about Gu Beiyue, but now Gu Beiyue had fallen into Ning Cheng's hands. Could it be that Gu Beiyue was the Shadow Clan man? Did something happen between the Nether and D clans? Or was it just a coincidence that the Shadow Clan man was still in the Chu clan's hands? Only by rescuing Gu Beiyue would he know the answer to all these questions. If Gu Beiyue really was a member of the Shadow Clan, then he must have a motive for getting close to Han Yunxi. Long Fei Yi would never allow anyone who knew Han Yunxi's secrets to fall into the D clan's hands. No matter what, he'd save Gu Beiyue. Gu Beiyue. He muttered to himself. Currently, Han Yunxi was drinking tea. Her hand trembled at the name, causing the teacup to fall to the ground and shatter. Long Fei Yi looked down with furrowed brows. As a tea addict, he was very particular about his tea sets. No matter where he went, he'd always bring a few sets with him. A tea set usually had 5 cups, but he always had 6. The extra one was a custom-made personal cup. He only had one custom-made cup, so even Tang Li had no use for it. It wasn't until Han Yunxi was by his side that he had an extra cup on his tea table. Now it was his favorite, the Ru Kiln Sky Blue Glaze. After all, it was impossible for 2 identical pieces of porcelain to appear. Even if the shape was the same, there were still differences in color and luster. It was gone, and it was gone. Long Fei Yi was still staring at the broken porcelain when Han Yunxi finished reading the letter. Her entire face had turned white. How could this be? When did Dr. Gu fall into their hands? Wasn't he at Pill Fiend Pharmacy's branch all this time? This is too much. What does it mean to make things difficult for a doctor who can't even truss up a chicken? Han Yunxi was extremely agitated. She never thought that Ning Cheng's group would make a move against Gu Beiyue. Long Fei Yi glanced at her, his displeasure written all over his face. But Han Yunxi was too preoccupied with Gu Beiyue to notice. Long Fei Yi didn't fuss over the cup, but said coldly, "When 2 armies are at war, it's common for hostages and prisoners of war to negotiate. What are you so anxious about?" Han Yunxi was indeed anxious. Of course she knew that hostages depended on one's skills. They had Chu Tianyin in their hands, didn't they? But Gu Beiyue was different. Gu Beiyue had nothing to do with this war. When Gu Beiyue was Emperor Tianhui's personal imperial physician, he held the emperor's life in his hands. Thus, he controlled Tianning's political situation. But he only did what he was supposed to do. He'd never been tempted or threatened, nor had he ever interfered with government affairs. He was simply a compassionate and kind-hearted doctor who was loyal to his duties. Every day, he would sit at Pill Fiend Pharmacy and save countless lives. What right did Ning Cheng's group have to make a move against Gu Beiyue? Where was their bottom line? Han Yunxi was both angry and worried. After all, hostages had the worst days. How could Gu Beiyue's health take it? "Aren't you anxious?" Han Yunxi asked Long Fei Yi. Long Fei Yi didn't answer. "Do you think Gu Beiyue is worth the Chu clan?" Han Yunxi assumed that Long Fei Yi wasn't planning to save the hostages. She didn't speak, but furrowed her brows as she stared at Long Fei Yi. Long Fei Yi's gaze was originally cold, but after being stared at for a while, he actually averted his gaze. Some people's value is immeasurable. Long Fei Yi, Gu Beiyue doesn't owe us anything. We can't owe him anything either. Ning Cheng kidnapped him because he's a member of Pill Fiend Pharmacy and has a good relationship with us. Han Yunxi said seriously. Han Yunxi had always been clear about gratitude and grudges, love and hate. She never went back on her words. If she loved someone, she loved them. If she didn't love them, she didn't love them. If she hated them, she hated them. She never owed anyone anything. Mute Granny, whose condition was still unknown, was the first. She didn't want Gu Beiyue to become the second. We don't owe him anything. Long Fei Yi muttered to himself. We can't owe him anything. Han Yunxi said seriously. It wasn't that they didn't owe him anything, it was that they couldn't owe him anything. Long Fei Yi didn't know what he was thinking, but after a moment of silence, he generously agreed, all right, we won't owe him anything. No one can touch a member of Pill Fiend Pharmacy. The Chu family wants to raise the price, right? I'll make sure the Chu family loses both their chickens and eggs. As for Ningqing, if he really thinks he's won, I don't mind teaching him what it means to have the last laugh. With Long Fei Ye's words, Han Yunxi finally felt relieved. Although Ningqing had gained the upper hand this time, this matter wasn't over yet. She was looking forward to the day when she and Ningqing would have a face-to-face confrontation. However, the most important thing right now was to deal with the Chu family. Long Fei Yi didn't express any opinions on Ningqing's request for the Chu family to surrender, nor did he mention Gu Beiyue. He only instructed his attendants, send a letter to the Chu family. If this prince doesn't see the Chu family raise a white flag of surrender before nightfall, this prince will mobilize all 3 armies to exterminate the Chu family. Hearing this, Han Yunxi knew that Long Fei Yi planned to bypass the Chu family and directly negotiate with Ningqing. That was the wisest choice. This way, whether it was them or Ningqing, they wouldn't be under the Chu family's control. Whether the Chu family surrendered or not, Gu Beiyue would be safe for the time being. With the boulder in her heart temporarily lifted, Han Yunxi finally had the mood to seriously ponder over General Chu's letter. The letter only mentioned that Gu Beiyue was in Ningqing's hands and that Ningqing planned to exchange Gu Beiyue for Chu Tianyin. Nothing else was mentioned. Han Yunxi didn't understand. How did Gu Beiyue end up in Ningqing's hands? There are so many people in Pill Fiend Pharmacy, so why did he choose Gu Beiyue? Han Yunxi asked seriously. Long Fei Yi also wanted to know the truth. But before he figured out Gu Beiyue's intentions, he wouldn't tell Han Yunxi too much. Gu Beiyue must have run into Ningqing's men when he was running around. Tang Li, who'd been silent all this time, interrupted. Before, Chu Shifeng asked him about induced labor, but couldn't find him in all of Pill Fiend Pharmacy's branches. It was only at the Binhai branch that we got news that Gu Beiyue took a leave of absence to search for medicine in Medicine City. Who knew something would happen? Tang Li wasn't lying, but he and Long Fei Yi both saw Gu Beiyue's leave of absence as an excuse. Han Yunxi sighed softly and didn't say anything. Even if Gu Beiyue's safety was only temporary, soldiers were often cruel and ruthless. Ningqing looked scholarly and refined, but he wasn't a scholarly general like Mu Qingwu. She just wanted to deal with the Chu clan as soon as possible so she could find a way to rescue Gu Beiyue. She didn't have a good impression of the Chu clan to begin with, but now she loathed them even more. Tomorrow was the last day of the 10-day deadline. She wanted to see what else the Chu clan could use to negotiate with Long Fei Yi. Chapter 606. As soon as Han Yunxi left, Tang Li immediately scooted over. Big bro, there's no need to guess. That guy in the 1000 Buddha cave must be Gu Beiyue. Gu Beiyue must have fallen into the Chu clan's hands first, then Ningqing's. Once Ningqing got Gu Beiyue, he dug a hole for the Chu clan. That brat's too black-hearted. Long Fei Yi didn't reply, so Tang Li continued, Big bro, what do you think happened in the 1000 Buddha cave? How did Gu Beiyue get hurt like that? If he can't beat them, he can always run. Who in the world can catch up to him? He couldn't have hurt Chu Yunyi's blind eye, could he? Long Fei Yi still didn't speak. The more Tang Li thought about it, the stranger he felt. Does Ningqing know about Gu Beiyue's identity? Could it be that Gu Beiyue and the Chu clan teamed up to trick both Ningqing and us? Or perhaps Gu Beiyue and Ning Qing are in cahoots. Tang Li muttered a bunch of guesses to himself. By the end, he was in disarray. He suddenly felt that Han Yunxi was quite lucky. She knew less and had fewer worries. She didn't have so many things she couldn't figure out. Big bro, what are you thinking? Tell me in secret, Tang Li begged. Unfortunately, Long Feiyi still ignored him. Ever since he was young, Tang Li hated Long Feiyi ignoring him the most. He coughed lightly a few times and slowly picked up the broken pieces of porcelain on the ground. Big bro, you'll definitely save Gu Beiyue. You were making sister-in-law anxious on purpose, weren't you? Despite Tang Li's words, Long Feiyi was still expressionless. A crafty look flashed past Tang Li's eyes as he muttered to himself, Big bro, the smell of jealousy is so strong. Tang Li assumed that Long Feiyi's stoic face would show some emotion, but Long Feiyi was still expressionless. Still, he stood up and kicked Tang Li's chair to pieces. Before Tang Li could react, his butt hit the ground with a thump. He was 100% sure it was a flower. In any case, he'd been sleeping on his stomach all night. Chu Yuni and General Chu were eagerly anticipating Long Feiyi and Ning Cheng's replies. They wanted to sit and watch the battle while Long Feiyi and Ning Cheng fought it out. But when they received Long Feiyi and Ning Cheng's replies at the same time, both of them lost all hope. Long Feiyi and Ning Cheng's replies were the same. They wouldn't give the Chu clan any chances. Either they surrendered, or they'd send out their troops and flatten Fenglin Prefecture. General Chu thought he was smart enough to beat around the bush. In the end, he still had to choose between Long Feiyi and Ning Qing. General Chu's arm was wrapped tightly in bandages. Anyone who didn't know better would think his arm was broken, but his arm was covered in medicine to stop the itching and pain. The amount of poison in his hand was increasing by the day. He didn't know how much longer he could hold out. It was impossible to say that he hadn't given up on the choice. He hoped that the poison in his hand could be cured and that his son would be safe. Big bro, I want to choose the Duke of Qin. As I see it, Ning Qing can't deal with the Duke of Qin. Rather than make the Chu clan his enemy, it's better to pledge loyalty to him. As long as we're his subordinates, we'll have plenty of chances to plot revenge in the future. Since the Duke of Qin gave the Chu clan this chance, shouldn't the Chu clan have the courage to take it? General Chu murmured. What if I say I choose Ning Qing? Chu Yuni retorted. How could Chu Yuni have no selfish motives? Actually, he had already considered surrendering to Long Feiyi and Ning Qing before Ning Qing and Ning Cheng's letters of surrender. He believed that he hadn't misjudged Ning Qing. Ning Qing might have the strength to fight for the world, but he definitely didn't have the heart to do so. Otherwise, with the Ning clan's wealth and military might, Ning Qing wouldn't have waited until now to betray Tianning. He firmly believed that Ning Qing would always be loyal to the Chu clan's mission and Western Qin's imperial clan. Ning Qing had only tricked the Chu clan this time because he wanted to seize the initiative in the alliance between the two clans. Long Feiyi might want to destroy the Chu clan, but Ning Qing wouldn't. Hearing Chu Yuni's explanation, General Chu grew dissatisfied. Big bro, are you going to fall in the same place twice? You've already suffered at Ning Cheng's hands. I won't be wrong this time. Chu Yuni was stubborn. No, the Chu clan doesn't have the confidence to make any more mistakes. Big bro, think thrice. General Chu refused to budge. If Big bro insists, then please forgive this brother of mine. Before he could finish, Chu Yuni cut him off. He was very clear on his younger brother's temper. If things went south, he'd take his men and surrender to Long Feiyi. Since even I, the clan head, can't make the decision, then let the heavens decide, Chu Yuni said as he took out a gold coin. Heads, the Duke of Qin. Tails, Ning Qing. How's that? General Chu hesitated for a long time before nodding his head. In the end, he didn't want to fall out with Chu Yuni. Chu Yuni generously handed the coin to General Chu for him to toss. General Chu didn't decline, but tossed the coin high into the air before catching it in his palm and opening it in front of Chu Yuni's face. Both of them stared at the coin with different expressions on their faces. The coin was tails, which meant Chu Yuni had won. General Chu quickly flipped the coin over and saw that the other side was heads. There was nothing fishy about the coin at all. He'd lost. Such is the will of heaven, Chu Yuni said simply before taking the coin away. Actually, there was something fishy about the coin. No matter how you tossed it, tails would always be heads. Unfortunately, General Chu wouldn't toss it a second time. While General Chu was disappointed, Chu Yuni patted him on the shoulder. Trust me, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunshi will never give up on Gu Beiyue. Tianyin will come back. General Chu had no choice but to write a letter to Ning Qing immediately. Chu Yuni wanted to take the risk, but he couldn't afford it. He had to have Ning Qing meet with Long Fei Yi before nightfall tomorrow. Otherwise, if the Long Fei Yi didn't get a reply from the Chu clan, he'd kill Tianyin in a fit of rage. Then General Chu would have no hope left for the rest of his life. Once the letter was sent out, General Chu didn't sleep for an entire day and night. It wasn't until the sun was setting that he received a reply from Ning Qing, saying that he'd already finished talking with Long Fei Yi. They'd meet at Fenglin Prefecture's famous octagonal pavilion tomorrow afternoon to exchange hostages. In other words, Long Fei Yi has agreed to the exchange. General Chu was overjoyed. Chu Yuni wasn't surprised. I told you not to worry long ago. Han Yunshi was Long Fei Ye's weakness, so Han Yunshi's weakness was Long Fei Ye's weakness as well. As long as Tianyin can come back, General Chu thought, I don't care if my arm is crippled. In the future, the Chu clan will rely on Tianyin. Since they'd chosen Ning Qing, the Chu clan had to protect Fenglin Prefecture as well. General Chu didn't sleep for the entire night, but set up an inescapable net to make all the necessary preparations. First, he was prepared to cooperate with Ning Cheng's army. If the Long Fei Yi decided to attack the city after the exchange, they wouldn't be caught off guard. Second, he was prepared to deal with Long Fei Yi in case the Long Fei Yi played any tricks and refused to hand over Chu Tianyin. After all, he and Chu Yuni couldn't use the driving arrow arts, and Ning Qing wasn't Long Fei Ye's match. If General Chu was so wary of exchanging hostages on his own turf, heaven knows how much he feared Long Fei Yi. The next day, Ning Qing arrived ahead of schedule, while Long Fei Yi showed up as promised. The Chu clan had arranged for a group of archers to surround the octagonal pavilion, but more were hidden in the shadows. Ning Qing sat alone in the pavilion, sipping wine while Chu Yuni and General Chu stood to one side. After entering the tiger's den, Long Fei Yi had only brought along Han Yunshi and Tang Li. He held Han Yunshi in his arms while Tang Li held Chu Tianyin in his custody. Last time, Chu Tianyin had been tormented miserably by Han Yunshi and Tang Li, but he hadn't suffered any injuries. Besides looking a little skinnier, he didn't seem to be in any serious condition. As soon as they reached the octagonal pavilion, Long Fei Yi sensed that there were many experts lying in ambush around them, but he didn't pay them any attention. From a distance, he could see Ning Qing sitting in the pavilion, but he didn't pay much attention to him either. Instead, he walked over expressionlessly. Han Yunshi, on the other hand, noticed Ning Qing. Today's Ning Qing wasn't the scholarly robed Ning Qing she'd seen last time, nor was he the white-robed, silver-armored General Ning that people usually talked about. Today, Ning Qing was dressed in the same black robes as Long Fei Yi, looking noble and domineering with a threatening aura. But Han Yunxi could tell at a glance the difference between the two of them. Long Fei Ye's domineering aura was cold and emotionless, while Ning Cheng's domineering aura was arrogant and wild. The coldness in his eyes was different from Long Fei Ye's. His coldness was arrogant and aloof, while Long Fei Ye's coldness was cold and emotionless. She hadn't misjudged before. Ning Cheng's elegance was just an act. Of course, Han Yunxi wasn't concerned about these things. She was concerned about Gu Beiyue. There were only 3 people in the pavilion. She didn't see the familiar white figure. Long Fei Yi seemed to know her worries. As soon as he entered the pavilion, he asked coldly, "Where's Gu Beiyue?" Ning Cheng's lips curled into a cold smile. He was no longer respectful. He didn't even stand up. He just sat there casually and poured a cup of wine for Long Fei Yi. Sit. This aura was strong enough. But Long Fei Yi wasn't just intimidating. He didn't waste words, but held Han Yunxi tightly with one hand while pressing down on Chu Tiannin's elbow with the other. With a sudden tug, Chu Tiannin's elbow joint was dislocated. If the joint wasn't reconnected in time, it'd leave behind side effects. Forget about shooting arrows, even lifting heavy objects would cause the joint to fall off. Both Chu Yuni and General Chu grew anxious. After all, with both of them injured, Chu Tianyin was the Chu clan's only hope. Before Long Fei Yi could ask any questions, General Chu quickly said, "Gu Beiyue's right in the woods. Duke of Qin, as long as you release Tianyin, old man will personally bring Gu Beiyue here." Neither General Chu nor anyone else in the Chu clan had the right to discuss terms with Long Fei Yi. Long Fei Yi wouldn't waste words with them either. He didn't even spare General Chu a glance, but grabbed Chu Tiannin's shoulder joint and dislocated it. At this time, Chu Tianyin, who had been keeping his head down all this time, finally couldn't take it anymore and let out a soft snort. "Tianyin." General Chu panicked, but Chu Tianyin only glanced at him without a word. Chu Tianyin had no idea what was going on. He had no idea why Gu Beiyue had fallen into Ning Cheng's hands, or Ning Cheng's true identity. He was far more cautious than his father and uncle. When he didn't know the situation, the best thing to do was to keep his mouth shut. With his elbow dislocated, Chu Tiannin's hand hung limply by his side like a puppet without strings. After all, Chu Tiannin's hand was the future of the Chu clan. Without a word, General Chu turned to head back into the woods to bring Gu Beiyue back. Would Ning Qing stop him? Chapter 607. Of course Ning Qing would stop him. He'd left Gu Beiyue in the forest instead of bringing him here because he wanted to show Long Fei Yi his strength. He might have won the battle of the 3 armies, but he hadn't won anything at all. This time, the Chu clan had chosen him, so he really did beat Long Fei Yi and the Chu clan. He'd been in a good mood since receiving Chu Yuni's letter, but as soon as he saw Long Fei, his joy vanished. That was because he couldn't see a single trace of a loser's disappointment or despondency. In fact, he couldn't even see Long Fei's emotions. This man was like a glacier, lofty and unshakable. He'd even shattered his initial show of strength without a word and told General Chu to obediently bring his men here. How could the proud Ning Qing accept this? He didn't stop General Chu directly, but lazily raised his wine cup with a chuckle. "Someone come, break Gu Beiyue's elbow and shoulder joints for your lordship." General Chu naturally stopped in his tracks at these words. After all, they'd already surrendered to Ning Qing. Han Yunxi's heart thumped, but she didn't show it. She was anxious, but she didn't need to lose her sense of propriety. They were here to exchange hostages, but Ning Qing had hidden them away to make things difficult for them. If they gave way and let Ning Qing gain the upper hand, they'd lose for real. Han Yunxi grit her teeth and endured. Long Fei Yi knew Ning Chang's intentions as well. He gave a cold snort and said, "Since you're not sincere, why waste time?" So speaking, he wrapped his arm around Han Yunxi and turned to leave. Tang Li and Chu Tianyin hurried to catch up. Ning Qing didn't think much of it. He drank as he watched Long Fei Yi and the rest leave. Long Fei Yi and the rest walked at a steady pace until they were far away, but Ning Qing didn't stop them. "Do you want to turn back?" Long Fei Yi asked in a low voice. This was a game between Long Fei Yi and Ning Qing. The stakes were Gu Beiyue and Chu Tianyin. Han Yunxi's heart was racing. She could afford to lose, but the stakes were Gu Beiyue. She couldn't afford to lose. Still, she was resolute. No need. She knew that once they turned back, once they conceded, they wouldn't be able to take Gu Beiyue away easily. She firmly believed in her and Long Fei's judgment that Ning Qing wouldn't give up on Chu Tianyin. Step by step, they walked further and further away from Gu Beiyue's woods. It wasn't clear whether Gu Beiyue knew they were coming. "Dr. Gu, forgive me for betting on you." Han Yunxi didn't stop, but grabbed Long Fei Ye's hand and hurried forward. Seeing this, the calm Ning Qing suddenly stood up and walked a few steps out of the pavilion. He looked carefully to make sure he wasn't seeing things. Han Yunxi was actually dragging Long Fei Yi away, as if she didn't want to stay a moment longer. How could this be? Chu Qingge had told him with certainty that Han Yunxi and Gu Beiyue were very close. Han Yunxi wouldn't leave him in the lurch. But now it wasn't Long Fei Yi who wanted to leave, but this woman. So Gu Beiyue was very important to her, but not so important that she had to protect him. In Ning Chang's eyes, Gu Beiyue was nothing more than a doctor. After taking Gu Beiyue away from Chu Yuni's hands, he'd kept Gu Beiyue locked up in prison without a second glance. If Han Yunxi wanted to give up on Gu Beiyue, then Gu Beiyue would have no value at all. Han Yunxi was walking too fast. Even though Ning Qing had chased after her for a few steps, he couldn't even see their figures anymore. What was the point of keeping a doctor? Only with Chu Tianyin could they control the Chu clan troops. Finally, Ning Qing spoke up. "Chu Yuni, what are you spacing out for? Go and call him back." General Chu walked faster than Chu Yuni. He'd personally gone to the woods to bring Gu Beiyue back. Ning Qing had used the word call, but Chu Yuni was the one who coaxed him. Duke of Qin, esteemed Wang Fei, the Duke of Ning was only joking just then. Please don't take offense. Gu Beiyue is already in the pavilion, so please come in. As the head of a clan, Chu Yuni's prestige had been swept to the ground. Chu Tianyin saw it all and didn't say a word, but his heart was filled with disappointment and anger. He'd only been locked up for a short while, but the Nether clan's Chu clan was already nothing in his eyes and heart. What did it count for to surrender and bow down to someone else? Han Yunxi looked up at Long Fei Yi with a bright smile. "Long Fei Yi, I won my bet again." Long Fei Yi only smiled wordlessly before turning around to face Chu Yuni. With tacit understanding, the two of them kept their faces expressionless. By the time they returned to the pavilion, Gu Beiyue had already been brought over. Han Yunxi's heart ached at the sight. She really wanted to rush over and hug him. She didn't care about romance or anything else, but simply wanted to hug him. But she couldn't. She secretly summoned Lil Thing out of her poison storage space. Lil Thing was still groggy when it emerged, but unlike last time, it immediately smelled the familiar scent in the air. This sense of familiarity was no less than the numbness it felt towards Mama Yunxi. It immediately sobered up. "Sir!" Alarmed, it hastily scuttled out of Mama Yunxi's sleeves and saw the gentleman it had been longing for all this time. But, Lil Thing burst into tears at the sight of that familiar figure. It wasn't a squeak, but hot tears that filled its eyes. Lil Thing couldn't remember how many years it had lived, but it clearly remembered that it had never shed a tear before. It didn't even know it could cry. It leapt to the ground like a madman, ignoring the situation and scurrying to the gentleman's feet. If this was any other time, it would have jumped up and climbed onto the gentleman's robes, his back, or even his side. It loved to sit on the gentleman's shoulders and snuggle up to his neck, acting spoiled. The gentleman never chased it away, but used a single finger to gently rub its head or tickle its tail. Even a finger of young master's was warm. But this time, Lil Thing didn't dare to move. It sat by the gentleman's feet and looked up at him, tears streaming down its face non-stop. The gentleman was too weak. His frail body could topple over at any moment. He was practically unconscious and couldn't even stand straight. He had to rely on 2 people to support him. And this was only the surface. Lil Thing had already smelled the scent of blood and sensed something wrong with the gentleman's aura as soon as it drew near. It knew that the gentleman's legs and shoulders were heavily injured. His dantian was clotted with blood and his internal energy was completely gone. His internal injuries were severe. Just what had the gentleman experienced? Lil Thing stared blankly at him, its little paws wiping away its tears, but its vision was still blurry. How it wished that the gentleman would open his eyes and look at it. "Gentlemen, what's wrong?" Ever since the Chu clan archers surrounded Han Yunshi and the rest in Tianning's capital city, Lil Thing had appeared to protect Gu Beiyue. The Chu clan had taken notice of its existence, including Ning Qing. Ning Qing was currently looking at Lil Thing with interest as he smiled wickedly. "Who raised this mouse? It's so unruly." Han Yunshi could still bear it before, but she couldn't stand seeing Gu Beiyue like this. They'd tortured Chu Tianyin to the point of unconsciousness and cured his poison before bringing him here. Just what had these people done to Gu Beiyue? She cast a cold glance at Ning Qing and said calmly, "You don't even recognize a squirrel. It's fine if you're blind, but if you don't have common sense, hurry back and find your mother so she can teach you all over again." Ning Cheng's face turned black at her words. Han Yunshi's tone didn't carry any trace of sarcasm, as if she was simply stating facts. Ning Cheng felt even more humiliated. He wanted to retort, but had no words. On one side, Tang Li couldn't help but shoot a glance at Long Fei Yi. Fortunately, this older cousin of his who'd always treated Lil Thing as a mouse was still very calm right now. Ning Qing finally had a second impression of Han Yunshi. This woman's mouth was much sharper than Chu Qing's. She had sharp eyes and a sharp tongue. Unfortunately, he hated sharp-tongued women. "Someone come, chase that thing away," he ordered coldly. A few attendants immediately surrounded them. Lil Thing immediately sensed their hostility. It couldn't understand human speech, but it could tell that the gentleman had been kidnapped by these people. Mama Yunshi was holding Chu Tianyin in exchange for the hostage. These people were bad people. It narrowed its eyes at the surrounding attendants and grinned, revealing its sharp fangs. They dared to bully the gentleman, their crimes were unforgivable. Just as the attendants were about to pounce over, Lil Thing nimbly leaped and landed on one of their faces. With a vicious swipe of its sharp claws, Lil Thing actually tore off that person's entire face. Lil Thing was angry. "Oh!" The man screamed as blood flowed from his face. It was a ghastly sight, frightening everyone around them into backing away. The crowd had yet to recover from their shock. The little thing was extremely fast. Its figure flashed and stepped on the faces of the people who surrounded it. Its sharp claws accurately pierced into their eyes. Anyone who was pierced by it was completely blinded. Wails filled the air as Ning Qing rose to his feet in shock, staring at Lil Thing in disbelief. Lil Thing didn't even let go of the 2 guards supporting Gu Beiyue. As soon as they let go, Gu Beiyue toppled forward. Han Yunxi was about to rush over when Lil Thing scurried past. It was so small, only the size of a palm, but it used its claws to support Gu Beiyue's chest, taking all of his weight so he wouldn't hit the ground. Afraid that he'd be hurt, Lil Thing's claws were curled up. When you loved someone, you couldn't bear even the slightest bit of pain. But sir, how could you be hurt so badly? Lil Thing propped himself up as tears streamed down its face. The blood on its claws dripped down to mix with its tears and wet its face. Driving arrow arts. Ning Qing said coldly. How could he be provoked by a mere mouse? All of the Chu clan's driving arrow arts aimed their arrows at Lil Thing. Lil Thing's face was covered in blood as it looked around, bearing its sharp fangs and murderous aura. It was so frightening, yet so heart-wrenching. Those driving arrow arts soldiers also retreated, not daring to get too close. Han Yunxi's heart was broken as she watched. She wanted to rush over, but Long Fei didn't let go. He asked coldly, Ning Qing, what are you dawdling for? Get someone else. You've hurt so many of my men, and you're planning to let it go just like that? Ning Qing asked. So many of you can't even catch a squirrel, and you still have the nerve to mention it. Han Yunxi sneered. You. Ning Qing was at a loss for words again. Note to the readers, many things will happen during the new year, so I'll update once from the 4th to the 11th and twice on the 12th. Please be informed and wish everyone a happy new year. Chapter 608. Ning Qing finally looked at Han Yunxi seriously. This was the first time he'd ever looked at a woman so seriously. Unfortunately, before he could figure anything out, Long Fei pulled Han Yunxi behind him and unsheathed his sword. Are you exchanging, or not? In the past, Long Fei had always stood silently behind Han Yunxi, allowing her to show off her splendor for thousands of years. Only when she couldn't handle a situation would he show himself. This was the first time he'd pulled Han Yunxi behind him when there wasn't any danger. Ning Qing finally realized that he'd been distracted and immediately looked away. He didn't like this feeling of losing control, but he didn't have time to dwell on it. That was because Long Fei had unsheathed his sword. Exchange. For better or worse, let my men bring Gu Beiyue over, Ning Qing said. Lil Thing, get out of the way. Han Yunxi waved her hand at Lil Thing. Lil Thing understood what she meant. Although it didn't want to, it still stepped aside for the sake of bringing the gentleman back sooner. It carefully let go of Gu Beiyue and let him lie flat on his back. It didn't go far, but watched from the sidelines. The men who'd come to detain the man were none other than Chu Yuni and General Chu. His heart ached at the sight of Gu Beiyue's broken arm and wished he could cut it off right in front of Han Yunxi. Unfortunately, Lil Thing was watching their every move from the sidelines. Lil Thing's eyes were sharp and cold, enough to make people overlook its figure and think of a wolf. In the end, Chu Yuni and General Chu couldn't do anything but bring Gu Beiyue to Ning Cheng's side. At the same time, Teng Li brought Chu Tianyin to Long Fei's side. Long Fei had one hand behind his back while the other rested on Gu Beiyue's shoulder. Ning Qing rose to his feet, one hand still holding a wine cup while the other grabbed the back of Gu Beiyue's collar to keep him from toppling to the ground. The two men faced each other, only a step or two apart. Their figures were about the same, both tall and proud, refined and tough. Their eyes were as cold as water, reflecting each other's shadows. This was like a showdown between two kings on a narrow path where the victor was hard to predict. Everyone's attention was on the two men as they gasped in surprise and secretly compared them. These two men of about the same age were very, very similar, but they were still different. In terms of appearance, Ning Qing had thick eyebrows and big eyes. His features were sharp and defined, and he had a heroic air about him. No one could pick out any flaws in him. Long Fei Ye's icy face was like a sculpture, with no blind spots at all. It was perfect, cold, and handsome. In terms of wealth, Ning Qing controlled Cloud Realm Trade Consortium and controlled a third of Cloud Realm Continent's wealth. The white jade crystal ring on his thumb was 10 times more exquisite than the one worn by the Northern Dynasty's emperors. It was a symbol of his wealth. Long Fei Yi didn't pale in comparison. He never liked to wear jewelry, but the bracelet on his woman's wrist could beat any other piece of jewelry in the world. In terms of military strength, Ning Qing had a slight edge, especially after gaining the support of the Chu clan troops. Of course, if Long Fei's forces were joined by the mermaid soldiers, then they might not necessarily lose. After all, the Bailey Navy didn't only fight on the seas. Cloud Realm Continent had a vast network of rivers and lakes. In terms of martial arts, Long Fei Yi had a slight edge. Tian Shan Kenzo's swordsmanship and whip skills were not to be underestimated. In terms of aura, Long Fei Yi had the edge. Long Fei Yi's aura was inviolable since birth. It was the natural domineering air of a monarch, and the undeniable blood of the East Qin imperial clan coursing through his veins. Even if Ning Qing didn't know this, he couldn't ignore the fear in his heart as he faced Long Fei Yi. Han Yunxi watched as well, but didn't make any comparisons. She would never compare Long Fei Yi to any other man, because she didn't need to. This fellow had all sorts of good and bad points in her heart, but she recognized them all. Because she knew his faults, she still loved him. Did that count as true love? Or was there no hope for her? Suddenly, Ning Qing set down his wine cup. By now, everyone had recovered their wits, because the hostages were about to be switched. Almost at the same time, Long Fei Yi placed his other hand on Gu Beiyue's shoulder, while Ning Qing placed his other hand on Chu Tiannin's. Neither of them let go of their other hands, because they were still holding on to their own hostages. Although the two of them didn't seem to be moving, they had long begun competing. Han Yunxi couldn't tell, but she could guess. She picked up the restless little thing and gently soothed it as she waited. But Long Fei Yi didn't make them wait for long. Soon enough, the unconscious Gu Beiyue leaned towards Long Fei Yi, while Chu Tianyin remained in Long Fei Yi's hands, unable to move. Outsiders might not be able to tell, but Chu Yuni and General Chu were martial arts experts. Long Fei Yi and Ning Qing were competing in internal energy. During the entire process, Gu Beiyue remained unconscious and didn't help Long Fei Yi at all. Chu Tianyin, on the other hand, had been cooperating with Ning Qing the entire time. Unfortunately, in the end, neither Chu Tianyin nor Ning Qing were a match for Long Fei Yi. Just how deep was this man's internal energy? It was enough to make one wonder if he'd already surpassed his master, the old man from Kenzhou. Gu Beiyue was already leaning against Long Fei Yi's shoulder. Although Ning Qing hadn't let go of him yet, the outcome was already decided, so it didn't matter much. Meanwhile, Long Fei Yi's hand was still firmly pressed against Chu Tiannin's shoulder as he fought against Ning Qing. Ning Qing released Gu Beiyue and shrugged his shoulders before backing away. Long Fei Yi's lips quirked up in disdain as he pushed Chu Tianyin out of the ring. Han Yunxi hurried forward to help Gu Beiyue, but Long Fei Yi tossed Gu Beiyue to Tang Li instead. The impatient Han Yunxi knew what was going on and didn't say a word. Lil Thing immediately jumped onto Tang Li's shoulder and stared at its gentleman while wiping away its tears. The blood on its claws stained its eyes, making for a comical and pitiful sight. Han Yunxi immediately took Gu Beiyue's pulse, only to discover that Gu Beiyue's pulse was very weak. It seemed like he'd been seriously ill and hadn't recovered yet. Just like the last time, it was impossible to tell the exact illness, only that his body was very weak. Han Yunxi wasn't sure if Gu Beiyue's pulse was strange, or if her medical skills were limited and she couldn't pinpoint the crux of the problem. After Chu Tianyin was pushed away, Chu Yuni and General Chu immediately arranged for him to leave so they could find a doctor to treat his hand. He glanced back at Ning Qing as if wanting to say something, but in the end he said nothing and left first. Now that she'd gotten the man, it was time to leave. Han Yunshi hurried back to Medical City to write a letter to Third Elder Shin, telling him to hurry over and examine Gu Beiyue in detail so he could nurse his body back to health. Doctors didn't treat themselves, so Gu Beiyue's body was beyond her ability to treat. Long Fei Yi didn't want to linger either and turned to leave, but Ning Qing called him back. Duke of Qin, it's rare for us to meet. It won't be too late to drink a cup before you leave. Not interested, Long Fei Yi said. Could it be that you're afraid of getting drunk? He, I forgot that the Duke of Qin only drinks tea. Someone come, bring some tea, Ning Qing laughed. If Long Fei Yi still refused to drink after being provoked like this, those who didn't know better would think he was afraid. Ning Qing loved wine and had a bottomless capacity for it. Long Fei Yi knew this. He turned back and openly sat down across from Ning Qing. Before he could speak, Ning Qing was overjoyed and laughed. Someone come, bring out the dishes. Today, your lordship and the Duke of Qin won't leave until we're drunk. Soon enough, a group of servant girls brought in food and wine to fill the stone table. This was a premeditated Hongmen banquet. Han Yunshi glanced at the wine on the table, her lips curling into a contemptuous smile. Since Long Fei Yi had sat down, she'd accompany him to the end. There was no point in her being anxious. Without Long Fei Yi's protection, it was impossible for her and Tang Li to take Gu Beiyue out of Fenglin Prefecture. She decisively let Tang Li help Gu Beiyue to sit under a tree. Although her medical skills weren't great, she could at least perform acupuncture on Gu Beiyue to help him recover and feel more comfortable. Tang Li was about to help Gu Beiyue sit down when Han Yunshi suddenly stopped him. Take off your clothes. Cough. Tang Li narrowly avoided choking himself as he looked at Han Yunshi in disbelief. Even the tips of his ears were burning. My brother, his brother, what are you stammering for? Take off your clothes and lay them on the ground for Dr. Gu to sit. He can't take it in such cold weather. Han Yunshi was very serious. Tang Li exhaled in relief and was about to roll his eyes when he saw Gu Beiyue's pale face. His heart softened and he nimbly took off his fox fur robes and laid them on the ground. Lil Thing watched on anxiously from the side, wishing it could grow bigger so the gentleman could lie comfortably on its fur. As soon as Gu Beiyue sat down, Han Yunshi took out a life-saving pill and had him take it. Lil Thing wanted to tell Mama Yunshi that the gentleman's shoulder was injured, but it didn't dare to touch the wound. It didn't know how to tell her. After all, the gentleman was dressed in clean white robes and had no visible wounds. But its nose wouldn't make a mistake. It kept tugging at the hem of Mama Yunshi's robes anxiously. Han Yunshi was currently sitting behind Gu Beiyue as she carefully applied the needles. She noticed Lil Thing as well and assumed it was just worried about Gu Beiyue. While Han Yunshi was applying the needles, Long Fei Yi had already started drinking with Ning Qing in the pavilion. The two of them were practically having a drinking contest as they gulped down a cup in quick succession. Han Yunshi only glanced in that direction, most of her attention still on Gu Beiyue's side. But after she finished applying all the needles, she carefully looked towards the pavilion and raised her hand silently. Others might not know what she wanted to do, but Tang Li could tell at a glance. This woman was going to use the pear blossom teardrop rain. After all, they couldn't use force unless absolutely necessary in this situation. If they could, His Highness Duke of Qin would have ended the fight long ago instead of wasting time with Ning Qing. This woman wasn't an impulsive or hot-headed person, so what was she planning to do? Han Yunshi adjusted her aim while Tang Li knitted his brows. Once she was done, Tang Li, an expert in hidden weapons, glanced at her and knew who she was aiming at. But Tang Li's entire body felt unwell at the sight. Alarmed, he cried out, "Sister-in-law, what are you planning to do?" Han Yunxi ignored Tang Li and activated the pear blossom teardrop rain to shoot out a needle. Why did Han Yunxi shoot out a needle? Who was this needle aimed at? Chapter 609. It wasn't aimed at anyone else, but Long Fei Yi. That was why Tang Li was so shocked that he felt unwell. The pear blossom teardrop rain was a powerful weapon, but it couldn't escape the senses of an expert. Long Fei Yi and Ning Qing both sensed the weapon approaching. Because the weapon had come from Han Yunxi and Tang Li, Ning Qing was certain that it was aimed at him. Although he didn't move, his eyes flashed with disdain and loathing. He almost thought that Han Yunxi was different from Chu Qingge, but now it seemed that they were just as so-so. What a fool. No, Han Yunxi was even stupider than Chu Qingge. She'd actually used force to stir up trouble in a place like this. And she'd even used a hidden weapon for a sneak attack. If she used it, then so be it. She'd even been discovered as soon as she drew her needle. She's simply a joke. As the needle drew closer, the scorn in Ning Cheng's eyes grew more and more intense. She wanted to hurt me with a mere needle. He held his wine cup in one hand as he continued his drinking contest with Long Fei Yi. His other hand rested on the table, preparing to catch the needle and thoroughly humiliate Long Fei Yi. Of all the women he could find, he just had to keep an idiot like her by his side. Ning Qing waited, but as the needle drew closer, he suddenly realized that something was wrong. Judging from the strength and direction of the needle, it wasn't aimed at him, but Long Fei. Had Han Yunxi gone mad? She wanted to sneak attack Long Fei Yi. In a flash, Ning Qing completely changed his view of Han Yunxi. Was Han Yunxi even stupider than he thought? Had she missed? Or was she more treacherous than he thought? Was she planning to betray Long Fei Yi? Besides that, Ning Qing couldn't think of any other reason. He couldn't figure out this woman. When it came to assassination weapons, especially those from the Tang clan, Long Fei was far more familiar with them than Ning Qing. As soon as he sensed the needles flying at him from behind, he knew they were aimed at him. Moreover, judging by the strength and speed of the needles, he was certain that they'd come from the pear blossom teardrop rain hidden in Han Yunxi's sleeve. What was this woman trying to do? To be honest, Long Fei Yi couldn't figure it out. But he didn't hesitate for even a second. He sat there, unmoving. The needle drew closer and sank into Long Fei Yi's back. It wasn't deep, but it didn't fall out of Long Fei Yi's back. Long Fei only needed to circulate his internal energy to force it out, but he didn't. The position of the needle wasn't fatal, but only Han Yunxi knew what kind of poison was on the needle. Long Fei Yi acted as if nothing had happened and continued to drink with Ning Qing. He rarely drank, but it didn't mean that he didn't know how to drink. The wine cup didn't touch his lips. Every time he raised his cup, he poured the entire cup of wine into his mouth and finished it in one gulp. It was undeniable that this man was so handsome even when he drank. He didn't care about the needle on his back. On the contrary, Ning Cheng's mind was on his back. Long Fei Yi coldly narrowed his eyes and placed a row of wine cups on the table. He slowly poured the wine until it was full. Only then did he look at Ning Qing. 10 cups, how about it? These two men had no rules when it came to drinking. They were competing to see how much they could drink. Although Ning Qing was full of doubts, he still agreed. He wouldn't get drunk even if they drank 100 cups, let alone 10. However, Long Fei Yi would definitely get drunk. No matter how good Long Fei Yi's alcohol tolerance was, even if it was better than his, he would still get drunk. This was because all the wine here had a drug added to it called Distillers' Grains No. 7. As long as a single drop was added into a large jar of wine, the alcohol content of the entire jar would be doubled. It had to be known that this wine was strong. An average drinker would get drunk after 1 cup. Even the best drinker wouldn't be able to last more than 10 cups. And now, he and Long Fei Yi had each drunk 15 cups. He had taken the antidote beforehand and was waiting for Long Fei's alcohol to kick in and turn him into a drunken mess. 10 cups. Ning Cheng was a bit incredulous. It seems that Your Highness Duke of Qin has a good tolerance. Long Fei Yi was very straightforward. He didn't wait for Ning Cheng to reply, but poured cup after cup into his mouth. If Ning Cheng didn't follow, he'd lose. If Ning Cheng followed, the first one to get drunk would be the loser. Naturally, Ning Cheng wanted to follow, so he didn't waste words and poured himself 10 full cups. Just like Long Fei Yi, he downed cup after cup in one gulp. Their drinking style left Chu Yuni and General Chu speechless. Meanwhile, behind Long Fei Yi, Tang Li was still stroking his chin, trying to figure out what that needle on Long Fei Ye's back was all about. He wasn't worried about Long Fei Ye's tolerance at all. With Long Fei Ye's normal tolerance, even 10 jugs of such strong alcohol wouldn't be a problem, much less a trifling 20 cups. As for Han Yunxi, she'd never seen Long Fei Yi drink before, so she wasn't sure how much he could drink. Still, she wasn't worried about Long Fei Yi. She was carefully changing the needles on Gu Beiyue's back, her eyes hooded and serious. No one dared to disturb her. Very soon, Long Fei Yi and Ning Cheng had both downed their 10 cups of wine. Long Fei Yi sat upright with an unchanging expression, cold and noble. He didn't look like someone who'd drunk at all. Ning Cheng looked the same as usual, but the victor was still undecided. Still, Ning Cheng couldn't understand. Why wasn't Long Fei Yi drunk yet? No matter who drank strong alcohol with distiller's grain number 7, they'd be dead drunk within 20 cups. Long Fei Yi had already downed 25 cups, so why wasn't he affected at all? Why? While Ning Cheng was still trying to figure it out, Long Fei poured another round of wine into the cups in front of him. Again, there were 10 cups. A complicated look flitted past Ning Cheng's eyes. He didn't follow immediately, but the retainer by his side couldn't help but cough lightly. He was reminding Ning Cheng that the antidote he'd taken could only block off 25 cups of wine at most. If he drank any more, he'd run out of antidote for distiller's grain number 7. Based on the doubled alcohol content, he could drink 5 more cups at most. Anything more than that and he'd be dead drunk. You're not following. Long Fei Yi raised his eyebrows and asked. Ning Cheng's face was cold and he didn't say anything, but he still began to pour wine. After the cups were full, the two of them began to drink 1 cup after another. However, Ning Cheng suspected the hidden needle on Long Fei Ye's back. At this time, Han Yunxi had already finished a course of acupuncture for Gu Beiyue. She took back all the gold needles and was about to get up. Who knew that Lil Thing would suddenly jump onto Gu Beiyue's leg and tear off a piece of cloth, revealing Gu Beiyue's injured knee. Seeing this, Han Yunxi was shocked. She hurriedly squatted down to examine it. She carefully tore the cloth and when she saw the wound, she sucked in a breath of cold air. This wound was caused by the Chu clan's arrow. It injured the tendon, which was also commonly known as the tendon. Han Yunxi hurriedly examined the wound in detail. She found that the wound had been there for a long time and the recovery wasn't optimistic. Firstly, it was because the wound was caused by the Chu clan's arrow and it wasn't treated in time. Secondly, it was because the wound hadn't healed before it stopped using medicine. Thirdly, it was related to Gu Beiyue's physical condition. His body's foundation wasn't good and he couldn't withstand such a serious injury. The more Han Yunxi looked, the angrier and more anxious she became. Gu Beiyue's injury couldn't be delayed. Even if the tendon wasn't injured, it couldn't be delayed, let alone now that it was accompanied by a torn tendon. If it was caused by the arrow, it wouldn't cause a tear. She was afraid that the arrow was shot at a tricky angle and hit the tendon. Later, when the sword was pulled out, it inevitably caused a tear. If it wasn't for someone supporting him, Gubayua probably wouldn't be able to stand or walk. In a sense, Gubayua's leg was now crippled. She wasn't sure if it could be cured, but no matter what, she had to fight for time. The sooner the treatment was treated, the more hope there would be, and the fewer side effects there would be. At this time, Lil Thing supported Gubayua's right shoulder and squeaked. Han Yunqi's heart unconsciously thumped. She knew that Lil Thing had found the wound again. She didn't care about the propriety between men and women. She hurriedly took out a small pair of scissors and cut off the cloth on Gubayua's shoulder. Who knew that this wound was even more serious than the one on his calf? This was a wound that went through his shoulder blade. There were wounds on both the front and back of Gubayua's shoulder. Similar to the wound on his calf, the recovery of Gubayua's shoulder blade wasn't very optimistic. With such a penetrating wound, who knew how much blood had been lost? Now that the bleeding had stopped and the wound was showing signs of healing, the scar on the bone was permanent and couldn't be healed. Even if Gubayua's wound healed, it would still hurt from time to time for a long time to come. A wound to the bone would never heal. Besides the Tang clan's assassination weapons, only the driving arrow arts of the Chu clan had such power. The Chu clan, what a Chu clan! Han Yunqi's entire being grew gloomy as a murderous aura emanated from her body. She strode into the pavilion and glared icily at Chu Yuni and General Chu as she spoke to Long Fei Yi. "We have to go back immediately. Gubayua's been seriously injured by the Chu clan's arrows. We can't afford to delay." Gubayua wasn't bleeding as much as Gu had last time and needed to stop the bleeding. His shoulder injury was already in such a state, so there was no need to rush the treatment. But Gubayua's calf injury had already been delayed for too long. They couldn't afford to delay any longer. Han Yunqi wasn't even sure if Gubayua could still walk normally. Her only thought was to save him as soon as possible and save as much as possible. After all, even if they left Fenglin Prefecture, she couldn't treat him immediately because she didn't know how. She had to contact Medical City's third eldershan right away. Judging from Gubayua's injuries and body condition, ordinary doctors wouldn't be able to treat him. Only a medical sage like Shinjueming had the skills to prescribe a complete treatment plan for Gubayua. All she could do was seize the time to find medicine for Gubayua's calf and prevent it from worsening. Han Yunqi came to urge them, but Long Fei Yi didn't even have a chance to speak before Ning Qing laughed coldly and said, "When men drink, women stand aside." Unfortunately, Han Yunqi didn't even spare him a glance. She completely ignored him. Ning Qing actually felt a little awkward. He was about to speak when Long Fei Yi stood up and said, "Let's stop here for today. We'll fight another day." After he finished speaking, he held Han Yunqi's hand and was about to leave. Ning Qing put down his wine cup and stood up as well. "Duke of Qin, are you a sore loser? If we continue fighting, are you sure this prince will lose?" Long Fei Yi countered with a question. Ning Qing actually replied without hesitation, "I'm sure." As soon as he finished speaking, Han Yunqi suddenly picked up the wine cup on the table and splashed it on Ning Qing's face. In that instant, the entire place fell silent. Everything was still, as if time had stopped. Only the wine on Ning Qing's face dripped down along his well-defined features. Chapter 610. Inside and outside the pavilion, everyone's attention was focused on the two of them. Silence reigned. Ning Cheng's face and hair were covered in wine, his expression as splendid as one could imagine. Still, not everyone was looking at him, because many of them were staring at Han Yunxi in disbelief. For example, Chu Yuni and General Chu. Long Feiyi, on the other hand, was looking at Ning Qing with a mocking smile. Han Yunxi wasn't very tall, so she looked even more petite next to the two men who were around 1.9 meters tall. Still, her aura didn't lose out to any of the men's. At this moment, her icy eyes were filled with anger and disdain. In any case, she was angry. She was already anxious to leave because of Gu Beiyue's injuries, but Ning Cheng's words had clearly angered her. At this moment, the stunned Ning Qing moved. He slowly wiped the wine from his face as he narrowed his eyes at Han Yunxi. He didn't say anything, but all the guards in the surroundings, whether out in the open or in the dark, came forward and surrounded the pavilion tightly. There were a total of 3 circles, 1 circle of archers, 1 circle of soldiers, and 1 circle of black-clothed experts. Han Yunxi, you dare! Ning Cheng's icy voice was filled with towering rage. His knuckles cracked as he clenched them so tightly that they seemed ready to strike at any moment. But Han Yunxi wasn't afraid at all. In fact, she was even angrier than him. Ning Qing, this cup of wine is for you to wash your face. It's to remind you not to be so shameless. Don't think no one can tell just because you used distiller's grain number 7 to cheat. Ning Cheng's anger abated at her words. This woman actually saw through it. Distiller's grain number 7 wasn't poison or medicine, but a rare auxiliary ingredient for wine. Very few people in the world knew about it, so how could a woman like Han Yunxi know? Moreover, she didn't drink the wine, so how could she tell? While Ning Qing was puzzled, Han Yunxi added, also, don't think that no one knows that you took the antidote in advance. Do you even know how to write the words obscene and shameless? You! Ning Qing fumed. His handsome face couldn't get any darker. What about me? Am I wrong? Han Yunxi raised her eyebrows and asked. Ning Qing wanted to answer, but he couldn't. There was indeed distiller's grain number 7 in the wine. Han Yunxi was right. He looked at Han Yunxi, his fists clenched tighter and tighter, but he had nothing to say. He had never been humiliated like this in his entire life, not to mention being scolded and condemned by a woman to his face. Although his expression was cold, his heart was filled with helplessness. Ever since he'd taken control of Cloud Realm Trade Consortium and the D clan, he'd faced all sorts of situations, but never had he been so helpless before. Han Yunxi didn't want to waste words with a man like him, much less waste her time. Without another word, she turned to leave. At this moment, Chu Yuni spoke up. Han Yunxi, you're a shameless woman. You say the Duke of Ning cheated, but what about you? Do you think we didn't see that needle of yours just then? Han Yunxi snorted with laughter. She pulled out the needle from Long Fei Ye's back and tossed it on the table. I was just helping the Duke of Qin cure his drunkenness. If Ning Qing hadn't cheated first, why would I need to cure my drunkenness? Also, it's fine if Ning Qing cheated. Such little tricks are nothing to me or the Duke of Qin. But he had the audacity to say the Duke of Qin was afraid of losing. And he was so sure he'd win. Han Yunxi paused to look at Ning Qing again, her lips curling into a sneer that was enough to disdain anyone. Does he still have any face left? Ning Qing wasn't planning to refute Han Yunxi in the first place, but Chu Yuni's words had earned him another round of scolding. His expression was as foul as it could get. Meanwhile, Chu Yuni realized that he'd done more harm than good. Resentful, he didn't dare to speak again. Birds of a feather flocked together. Long Fei Yi chuckled without a word. He took Han Yunxi's hand and turned to leave. The 3 guards surrounding them hadn't received Ning Cheng's orders, so they didn't move aside. But when Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi drew closer, they didn't have the guts to stop them. all they could do was back away. Long Fei Yi wouldn't allow anyone to stop him on his path. He hadn't taken more than a few steps when he raised his sword. In a flash, all the guards were on guard. The archers and black-robed assassins raised their swords as if they were facing a formidable foe. But before they could make a move, Ning Qing roared in irritation, "Get out of the way. All of you, get out of the way for your lordship." Hearing this, all the guards exhaled in relief. None of them wanted to fight with the Duke of Qin. As soon as the guards moved aside, Tang Li supported Gu Beiyue to join them. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi left without a backward glance. Inside and outside the pavilion, it was still as quiet and tense as ever. Ning Qing coldly stared at Han Yunxi and the rest as they left. He didn't move a muscle, his thoughts unclear. In any case, his arrogant face was filled with an unapproachable aura. But there was one person very close to Ning Qing. It was the same person who'd coughed lightly to remind Ning Qing. His name was Di Shu. He was Ning Cheng's personal retainer. Because he had the skills to help Ning Qing collect all sorts of fine wines from all over the world, he was favored. His original surname was Wang, but he later changed it to Di to show his loyalty. He was the one who told Ning Qing to use distiller's grains number 7, which he'd also found. "Master, Empress Dowager Chu is still waiting in the woods," Di Shu reminded him in a low voice. That's right, Chu Qingge had come as well. She'd made a lot of trouble with Ning Qing over the past few days and insisted on coming along. She wanted Ning Qing to seize the chance to take down Han Yunxi. Although Di Shu had found distiller's grains number 7, it was Chu Qingge's idea. She wanted to take advantage of the Duke of Qin's drunken stupor to teach Han Yunxi a lesson. Ning Qing was still in a fit of anger when he heard the words Empress Dowager Chu. His temper flared as he viciously kicked Di Shu out of the pavilion. The man tumbled out of the pavilion and flipped a few times before coming to a stop. That wasn't enough for Ning Qing to vent his anger. He kicked over the table and strode out of the pavilion. Instantly, everyone made way for him, afraid of being caught in the crossfire of his anger. Ning Qing didn't target anyone, but kept looking in the direction Han Yunxi and the rest had left. Everyone was in disbelief. Was the Duke of Ning really going to let the matter rest after being splashed with wine? That's impossible. By now, her petite figure had turned into a blur, but Ning Qing continued to stare and stare. Actually, he hadn't planned to do anything to Long Fei Yi in a drinking contest. Even he disdained using such a method to win against Long Fei Yi. He simply wanted to buy some time for Chu Qingge so she could settle accounts with Han Yunxi on her own. That way, he wouldn't have to be bothered every day. Seeing Han Yunxi's retreating form, Ning Qing felt an impulse to run over and explain things to her. He disdained the idea as his lips curved up into a scornful smile. He wiped his face again and licked the wine off his fingers. After a while, he muttered to himself, "Long Fei Yi, he. You have good eyes. Just wait, your lordship will have a real drinking contest with you one day." Soon enough, Chu Qingge emerged from the woods after receiving the news. She had endured for so long to see Long Fei Yi, all for the sake of Ning Cheng's good news. Who knew that Ning Qing would let Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi go so easily? Chu Qingge's angry voice reached his ears before she even arrived. "Ning Cheng. What's the meaning of this? Was your promise to me just a bunch of nonsense?" Ning Cheng withdrew his gaze and resumed his usual arrogance. He ignored Chu Qingge and looked coldly at Chu Yuni and General Chu. "Someone come, take these two to the three-way prison. Without your lordship's orders, no one is allowed to visit them." Ning Cheng. "Ning Cheng, what's the meaning of this?" Chu Yuni and General Chu were both alarmed, especially Chu Yuni. They'd already surrendered, so what else did Ning Cheng want? Ning Cheng looked at the two men disdainfully. Your lordship doesn't keep useless people in his army. Chu Yuni was blind in one eye, while General Chu was crippled in one arm. One couldn't aim at a target, while the other couldn't shoot an arrow. In Ning Chang's eyes, they really were useless trash. Someone come. General Chu ordered, and the surrounding archers surrounded them. But Ning Ching only looked around before smiling coldly. Do you choose to be loyal to your young general, or continue to serve these useless people? Decide for yourself. What about Tianyin? General Chu grew alarmed. What do you want to do with him? Naturally, Ning Ching wanted to use Chu Yuni and General Chu to keep Chu Tianyin in check. Otherwise, with Chu Tianyin's temper, he'd never listen to his orders. How could the Chu clan troops and archers follow his orders? Hearing Ning Chang's words, the archers all withdrew. They were smart people and knew that their young general was their only hope. Once the archers were gone, two black-robed experts took Chu Yuni and General Chu into custody. Chinga. Where's your big brother? General Chu had no choice but to beg Chu Chinga for help. Unfortunately, she turned a deaf ear to his pleas. Ning Ching, you can't be like this. You and I are both great Qin's nobility. The Nether and D clans are both subjects of Western Qin. Don't you care about old friendships at all? Can't the Nether and D clans treat each other with sincerity and work together for Western Qin? Chu Yuni asked. Ning Ching was too lazy to expose Chu Yuni's ambitions, nor did he want to waste words. He simply signaled for the guards to take the two of them away, allowing them to curse until they broke their throats. He remained indifferent. Once they were taken away, Chu Chinga immediately asked Ning Ching, "Just when are you going to do what you promised me?" Ning Ching turned to leave in irritation, but Chu Chinga chased after him and ordered, "Ning Ching, they're definitely still in the city. Hurry and take Chu Tianyin in exchange for Han Yunxi. There's still time, so go right now." Has this woman lost her mind? She was the one who told Ning Ching how much Long Fei Yi valued Han Yunxi. Thus, if she could use Gu Beiyue as a hostage to threaten Han Yunxi, then she could threaten Long Fei Yi as well. Now she wanted him to take Chu Tianyin in exchange for Han Yunxi. How could Long Fei Yi agree to that? Ning Ching suddenly realized that he'd been blind in the past to lump Han Yunxi in the same category as this crazy woman. If Han Yunxi knew, would she splash him with wine again? Thinking up to here, Ning Chang's lips quirked up into a grin. He kept walking forward, treating Chu Chinga like air. Chu Chinga finally lost her temper and grabbed Ning Ching by the arm. Ning Ching stopped and turned back to look at his arm, his gaze cold and cruel. Before he even spoke, Chu Chinga was already frightened enough to let go of his arm. She didn't dare to say a word. "Once your lordship defeats the Duke of Qin, I'll naturally fulfill my promise," he said coldly as he strode off. Coldly, he strode away. He wanted to check on Chu Tianyin's condition and have a good chat with him about the Nether clan surrender. Although they were in Fenglin Prefecture and could attack Yuyun and Yaoshui prefectures at any time, Ning Ching had no intention of starting a war. But what about Long Fei Yi? By now, they'd just left Fenglin Prefecture's gates. Chapter 611. Long Fei Ye's troops were stationed at the northern outskirts of Yaoshui. They could join forces with Western Zhou's forces in Yuyun at any time to pincer Fenglin Prefecture. Even if they had to face off against Ning Chang's reinforcements, they still had a chance of victory. The Chu clan's choice must have angered Long Fei Yi. Ning Chang's performance today had also angered Long Fei Yi. Just how would he deal with the Chu clan and Ning Ching? What would he do if he fought, and what would he do if he didn't? Everything was in his heart. Even Han Yunxi had no idea. But Han Yunxi had no time to ask questions now. Her attention was focused on Gu Beiyue's injuries. As soon as they left Fenglin Prefecture, Han Yunxi summoned her guard Su Donglin. Immediately send a messenger hawk to Medical City and have them bring third Elder Shin here. Just say that Dr. Gu's knee joint has been torn and has been delayed for a long time. His injuries are serious. Have him hurry to Yaoshui Prefecture as soon as possible. Once Su Donglin left, Han Yunxi instructed another guard, send a message to Medicine City to find Wang Gong. Tell him that I need the best dragon tendon powder and have it delivered to Yaoshui Prefecture as soon as possible. Also, send someone to Yaoshui Prefecture first and find all the doctors there to wait in the courtyard. Long Fei Yi didn't speak the entire time. Tang Li stole a glance at him and saw Long Fei Yi's calm demeanor. Then he glanced at the unconscious Gu Beiyue and couldn't help but sigh with emotion. How could things be so coincidental? If they weren't certain before, then both he and Long Fei Yi were now certain that Gu Beiyue was a member of the Shadow Clan. In other words, he was the one who'd been taken away by Chu Yuni at Thousand Buddha Cave that day. The wounds on Gu Beiyue's shoulder and leg were proof. That day, Han Yunxi was busy looking for the wood of 10,000 poisons and didn't notice, but he and Long Fei Yi both saw the arrow on the bearded man's shoulder. Although Tang Li had always suspected that Han Yunxi had something to do with the royal family of Western Qin, he didn't dare to think further. That time at the crater, did Gu Beiyue really go there just for the poisonous beast? Was there really no other reason for him to set up shop in Pill Fiend Pharmacy? Tang Li thought about it and kept looking at Long Fei Yi. He couldn't help but think of Mute Granny. What did Long Fei Yi and Mute Granny talk about in the secret chamber that day? Why did Mute Granny commit suicide? What was it that Long Fei Yi didn't even want to hide it from his cousin? Long Fei Yi was silent, and so was Tang Li. Han Yunxi didn't notice anything strange about them. After getting into the carriage, Han Yunxi suddenly thought of Gu and Mu Ling Er. Mu Ling Er was definitely in Pill Fiend Pharmacy. As for Gu, he said he was going to Western Qin, but there was still no news from him. She didn't know if she could get in touch with him. But no matter what, Han Yunxi still wanted to give it a try. She immediately sent someone to get in touch with the two of them. Mu Ling Er was a genius pharmacist, and Gu was a pill fiend. Perhaps they knew of some miraculous medicine that could heal Gu Beiyue's injuries and save his leg. Fortunately, the carriage was spacious enough for Han Yunxi to let Gu Beiyue lie down in the carriage. But after Gu Beiyue lay down, there were only 2 seats left. Tang Li took the initiative to sit outside with the coachman. The carriage sped along, heading south from Fenglin Prefecture to Yaoshui's residence. If they were fast, it would take a day's journey. In a war-torn land, it wasn't easy to find medicine and doctors. Han Yunxi didn't touch Gu Beiyue's injuries the entire journey. She was the worst at dealing with bones and muscles, so she couldn't touch them. She could only let him lie down for now. Even though Gu Beiyue was in a sorry state, his face was as clean as ever. It was as if he was just sleeping. He was as calm and gentle as usual. The little thing was carefully licking the blood around his wound. From time to time, it would raise its head to look at its young master. There were even a few times when it stopped and sniffed at his nose to see if its young master was still breathing. Lil Thing was afraid that its young master would suddenly stop breathing and never wake up again. Han Yunxi looked at this scene and thought of Gu Beiyue's warm smile. She thought of how well Gu Beiyue had treated her, Lil Thing, and those who came to seek medical help. Her eyes couldn't help but sting. How could such a good person be crippled? It was too cruel. Coldly, she said, Long Fei Yi, I will definitely take revenge for this. I will, Long Fei Yi replied indifferently. Whether it was the Chu clan or Ningqing, whether it was the joint operation of the 3 armies, or the Chu clan's choice this time, he would settle all the debts together. If his calculations weren't wrong, the Chu clan and Ning Qing would be in big trouble in 10 days' time. He didn't plan to send troops to Fenglin Prefecture, nor did he plan to fight with Ning Qing for Tianing. However, this didn't mean that this competition was over. As long as he didn't leave the western regions and stayed in Yaoshuai, everything wasn't over yet. On the way, the two were silent, each with their own thoughts. Tang Li hesitated outside for a long time. In the end, he opened his mouth and asked, "Big brother, how do you know that sister-in-law's needle wasn't meant to kill you?" Although Tang Li didn't dare think about it, he had to think about it. He had to seriously consider Long Fei Ye's situation. If Han Yunxi really was the descendant of Western Qin's imperial family, then she would be the Tang clan's enemy, East Qin's enemy, and Long Fei Ye's enemy. The current Han Yunxi didn't know any martial arts, but if she wanted to kill Long Fei Yi, she could do so at any time. How could Tang Li not be cautious? In fact, Long Fei Yi had already exposed his weakest back to this woman more than once. If he really died at her hands, then he, Long Fei Yi, would accept it. Long Fei Yi ignored Tang Li and didn't intend to answer. Separated by the curtains, Han Yunxi couldn't see Tang Li's furrowed brows. She answered for Long Fei Yi, "Because your big brother trusts me." As soon as she walked into the pavilion, she knew that Ning Qing had added distiller's grain number 7 to his wine. This was an auxiliary ingredient for wine making, but it was also the most poisonous ingredient. The difference between strong wine and poison was not only in the quantity, but also in the other ingredients. At first, she didn't pay much attention to it. She only thought that Ning Qing was a good drinker. Later, when Ning Qing asked Long Fei Yi to drink, she knew what Ning Qing was planning. For her, to neutralize distiller's grain number 7, she didn't even need an antidote. All she needed was a needle. When she shot that needle, she really wasn't worried about whether Long Fei Yi would dodge, although she knew that he had the ability to detect and dodge. He trusted her. Then if my big brother points his sword at you one day, will you trust him? Tang Li asked. At these words, Long Fei Yi immediately looked up. Although they were separated by the curtains, his dark pupils were frighteningly deep. His gaze seemed capable of piercing through the curtains to stare straight at Tang Li. Han Yunxi didn't answer, but said, "He wouldn't lie to me." Last time on their way back from Pilfiend Pharmacy to Tianing's capital, Long Fei Yi had asked her the same question. Did she trust him? If she said yes, she would. But if he lied to her once, she'd fall for it 100 times. After being lied to 100 times, would she believe him again? Of course not. Thus, as long as he lied to her once, she'd never believe him. A complicated look flitted past Long Fei Ye's eyes before his gaze rested on Gu Beiyue again. Still, he didn't speak. Tang Li hadn't asked enough questions before he spoke up again. Sister-in-law, then if, before he could finish his question, Long Fei Yi cut him off coldly. His voice was as cold as ice, so cold that even Han Yunxi felt the chill. Meddlesome. Han Yunxi knew that this fellow didn't like discussing such topics. He didn't even like talking to her, much less Tang Li. Tang Li, however, understood the warning in Long Fei Ye's voice. He quickly joked, "Sister-in-law, I don't know if you trust my big brother, but he definitely trusts you. Otherwise, how could he not mind if you're so anxious about Gu Beiyue?" Mind? Gu Beiyue was already injured to this extent. Why would he mind? Wasn't it also because of them that Gu Beiyue was taken hostage out of the blue? If Long Fei Yi was jealous over this matter, Han Yunxi would definitely reward him with the word unreasonable. Long Fei Yi really wasn't jealous this time. Other than Han Yunxi's background, there was probably nothing else that could stop him from being jealous. Thus, neither Han Yunxi nor Long Fei Yi paid any attention to Tang Li's joke and pretended not to hear it. Tang Li waited outside for a long time, but there was no response from inside. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that something was amiss. The more he waited, the more flustered he felt. He was worried that he had asked too many questions just now and angered Long Fei Yi. One had to know that during this period of time, he didn't deliberately avoid it. He had basically exposed his identity, and the news would soon spread to the Tang sect. His father and Aunt Ru would definitely come looking for him. When that time came, Long Fei Yi would still have to protect him. Since there was no response from inside, Tang Li was afraid that he would make more mistakes if he said too much, so he could only shut up. However, he still wanted to find an opportunity to have a good talk with Long Fei Yi in private. He was certain that Long Fei had to know some things. After they quieted down, Han Yunxi gently leaned on Long Fei Yi's shoulder. Now that she was close, she could smell the alcohol on his body. Although she had given him an injection, that injection only dissolved distiller's grain number 7. It didn't completely remove the alcohol. Long Fei Yi drank a lot of alcohol, but he was very sober and didn't reek of alcohol. Han Yunxi, who had always hated the smell of alcohol, didn't dislike the smell on his body. She even deliberately sniffed it. I didn't know that you could hold your liquor so well. Drinking tea was a habit of being alone, while drinking wine was a mood of two people. Drinking tea was a meditation of the heart, while drinking wine was a wanton indulgence. Long Fei Yi didn't have the time to drink by himself or raise a cup to drown his sorrows. Strictly speaking, he had only drunk to his heart's content with Medicine City's Elder Wang and his master from Celestial Mountain. As for the last time with Gu, it didn't even count as drinking. Long Fei Yi replied to Han Yunxi, "Without this prince present, you're not allowed to touch wine." A few years ago, at Princess Changping's Yellow Flower Banquet, Han Yunxi had been forced to compete in drinking with men. She had almost fallen into Princess Changping and Murong Wanru's trap. At the time, he had also been paying attention to her every move, but he hadn't taken her seriously and had only watched coldly from the sidelines. Now that he thought about it, he was actually afraid. Han Yunxi casually replied, "Don't worry, I'm not interested in wine." As they traveled south, Han Yunxi fell asleep in Long Fei Yi's arms at night. Only now did Long Fei Yi reach out a hand towards Gu Beiyue. Seeing this, Lil Thing was on guard. When it saw that Mama Yunxi had fallen asleep, it immediately bared its fangs at Long Fei Yi in warning. Papa Long didn't like the gentleman, it could feel it. Long Fei Yi ignored Lil Thing and kept reaching out. Lil Thing grew anxious and was about to wake Mama Yunxi up when Papa Long took the gentleman's hand and took his pulse. Lil Thing immediately understood what was going on and obediently nestled by the gentleman's side. Papa Long was a martial arts practitioner, so he could tell from his pulse that the gentleman's martial arts had been crippled and that his dantian was clotted with blood. Yes, Long Fei Yi knew that Gu Beiyue's martial arts had been crippled as soon as he took his pulse. It was this pulse that allowed Long Fei Yi to confirm Gu Beiyue's identity once more. He silently withdrew his hand, but it was then that Gu Beiyue slowly opened his eyes. Chapter 6:12. Gu Beiyue slowly opened his eyes. It didn't seem like he'd just woken up, but more like he was faking it. His eyes were very clear and awake. When he saw Long Fei Yi looking down at him, he wasn't surprised or flustered. It was as if he'd opened his eyes on purpose to look at Long Fei Yi. Long Fei was as expressionless as ever, but his icy gaze took on a meaningful glint. He only looked at her without a word. Lil Thing on the side was stunned. Only now did it realize that the gentleman was faking it. Was it because it was worried? It hadn't realized. Lil Thing didn't care so much. It was fine as long as the gentleman woke up. It was so happy that it wanted to wake Mama Yunxi up, but a single glance from the gentleman stopped it from moving. Perhaps it was because it had been with the gentleman for too long, or perhaps it liked him too much, but Lil Thing could always accurately sense the gentleman's intentions, even if it was just a glance. In Lil Thing's eyes, no one else in this world treated Mama Yunshi better than the gentleman. Even it couldn't compare to him. As for Papa Long on the side, it still needed to observe. The gentleman must have his reasons for hiding things from Mama Yunshi, so it trusted the gentleman. Lil Thing silently returned to the gentleman's side and buried its head in his warm palm. It wanted to express its surprise, but it ended up wetting the gentleman's hand instead. Gu Beiyue could feel the warmth and moisture in his palm. He gave a pitying smile and gently cupped Lil Thing in his arms. Lil Thing snuggled against him, perfectly content. Long Fei glanced at him, his lips curling up in disdain. He still owed Lil Thing a hug, but he'd probably long forgotten about it. He seemed to have long seen through Gu Beiyue's act, but didn't ask anything. He didn't show his emotions, but silently withdrew his hand and averted his gaze. Gu Beiyue wasn't surprised by this, but closed his eyes again. Han Yunshi fell asleep. The two men were silent with tacit understanding. There were some things that couldn't be said in front of Han Yunshi. Long Fei thought so, and so did Gu Beiyue. This was their tacit understanding, the only tacit understanding between them. Back at the Thousand Buddha Cavern, even though Long Fei's group was dressed in black, Gu Beiyue was able to guess that it was them. He also recognized the Long Fei's golden whip. At that time, although Long Fei was busy fighting, he paid a lot of attention to him. Now that he had fallen into Chang Fei's hands and the injuries on his shoulders and legs had been discovered, he knew that there was no way he could escape this time. After a sleepless night filled with the sounds of carriages, they finally arrived at Long Fei's estate in Yaoshui Prefecture around noon the next day. Su Donglin had already come over in advance to make arrangements. At this time, doctors were gathered in the courtyard. Han Yunshi immediately organized a consultation with the doctors. Some of the doctors' opinions were laughable and childish to Gu Beiyue. One had to know that he was well aware of his own condition. If even he couldn't cure himself, how could others? He didn't have any intention of mocking the doctors, but he felt helpless in his heart. He calmly fainted and allowed the doctors to examine him. He didn't have the irritable temper of a normal patient. After a fierce round of questioning and debate, the consultation didn't reach a conclusion. The doctors only agreed on 2 points. The first was that Gu Beiyue's leg injury wouldn't heal unless there was a miracle. They could only do their best to prevent it from worsening. The second point was that Gu Beiyue's body was too weak and couldn't use overly strong medicines. They could only use mild medicines to slowly recover. Han Yunshi saw these 2 points as nonsense. In a fit of anger, she sent all the doctors away. The only thing they could do now was wait for Medicine City's dragon tendon powder. That thing was a good medicine to treat muscles and bones. At the very least, it could prevent the injury from worsening until Third Elder Shin arrived. Fortunately, Medicine City delivered the dragon tendon powder that afternoon. This thing was controlled by the Council of Elders and wasn't for sale. If it weren't for Han Yunshi and Long Fei, they wouldn't have been able to obtain it so quickly. The dragon tendon powder was tied to the leg of a messenger eagle. It was only a small packet, but it was enough for Gu Beiyue to use for a long time. Han Yunshi immediately went to prepare the medicine herself after receiving it. As soon as she left the room, Long Fei, who had been brewing tea at the tea table, stood up and walked over. He stood beside the bed with his hands behind his back and said coldly, "You can wake up now." Gu Beiyue immediately woke up. He opened his eyes and smiled faintly. There was no wariness, no hostility, no surprise, and no panic. The calmness in his eyes was one that could never be disturbed. Only when he was facing the woman he wanted to protect, and when he was facing himself, would he show the 7 emotions and 6 desires, love, hate, infatuation, and craziness. Such a gentle smile made Lil Thing intoxicated. A trace of admiration flitted across Long Fei Ye's eyes. Gu Beiyue was so calm and open-minded. Although he was weak, he was still a man. Coldly, he said, "You should know very well that your legs are crippled." "Yes," Gu Beiyue replied very calmly. "My shadow technique is also crippled." Before Long Fei Yi could question him, he admitted his identity with these 4 words. Long Fei Yi didn't find it strange that he admitted something with such irrefutable evidence. Coldly, he asked again, "Was it you at the Heaven's Pit? The person who saved Han Yunxi from Jun Yixie's hands was also you?" Long Fei Yi needed a definite answer, but when Gu Beiyue answered, "Yes," Long Fei Yi finally lost his calm. He coldly asked, "Why? Why did he get close to Han Yunxi in the Heaven's Pit? Why did he protect Han Yunxi?" After entering the Heaven's Pit secret room, Gu Beiyue had clearly disappeared. How did he know that Jun Yixie had kidnapped Han Yunxi? Why did he risk his life to save Han Yunxi? If Gu Beiyue wasn't the Shadow Clan's white-clothed young master, Long Fei Yi would have believed that he only approached Han Yunxi for the poison beast. However, if Gu Beiyue and the Shadow Clan's white-clothed young master were the same person, then all of Gu Beiyue's previous actions were suspicious. Long before going to the Heaven's Pit, he had approached Han Yunxi with a motive. Later, when he set up shop at Pill Fiend Pharmacy, he had even more ulterior motives. What did Gu Beiyue know? Was Gu Beiyue protecting something? What did Gu Beiyue have to do with the Nether and D clans? Did the Nether and D clans know anything? What did Gu Beiyue want to do? He had known Han Yunxi for so long, but he didn't seem to have done anything. Long Fei Yi considered many things. Calm and rational, he didn't act rashly and alert the enemy. After all, no one in this world knew about Mute Granny. Even Gu didn't know what Mute Granny had told him. He furrowed his brows and waited for Gu Beiyue's answer. Because Gu Beiyue was about to answer when the door was suddenly pushed open. He had no choice but to swallow back the words he was about to say. The person who came in was naturally Han Yunxi. When she saw Long Fei Yi standing by the bed, she quickly understood. Dr. Gu is awake. She rushed over and saw that Gu Beiyue was indeed awake. He was smiling faintly, as if he had just woken up and nothing had happened. He had originally planned to explain everything to Long Fei Yi before waking up, but now he had no choice but to face this woman first. Gu Beiyue was neither humble nor humble. "Esteemed Wang Fei, I can't get off the bed to greet you. My apologies." "What are you talking about?" Han Yunxi was so anxious that she didn't even ask how Gu Beiyue had been kidnapped. She hurriedly asked, "Your leg injury can still be treated, right? What medicine do you need? I'll send someone to find it immediately." "This is dragon tendon powder. I've already prepared it. Should I apply it normally, or do I need to do some special treatment? Hot compress? Or do you need acupuncture?" "Many thanks for esteemed Wang Fei's concern." Gu Beiyue was injured to this extent, but he was still very polite. This one can apply the medicine himself. Han Yunxi had already told Gu Beiyue more than once that he didn't need to be so polite. Every time, Gu Beiyue would nod his head and say, "Ha," but he would continue to be respectful and courteous the next time. Han Yunxi was already too lazy to argue with him about this, so she let him be. "Your shoulder is still injured, how are you going to apply medicine? If you pull on the wound, how many days will it take for your body to heal?" Han Yunxi frowned and seriously asked. She didn't give Gu Beiyue a chance to refute. She sat by the bed and directly ordered, "Don't move." She carefully began to treat the wound. There was nothing more urgent than applying medicine. A trace of helplessness flashed past Gu Beiyue's eyes, but he didn't refuse. Although the wound on his shoulder was penetrated, the inside was basically healed. Only the wound on the front and back was not easy to heal. Just now, a doctor had already treated it and removed the residue of the medicine. It was very simple to use new medicine. As for the wound on his leg, there were also a lot of residue of the medicine. However, it wasn't easy to remove it. This was because the injury was very serious and the wound was very deep. If one wasn't careful, it would hurt Gu Beiyue. This kind of pain was unbearable for ordinary people. Han Yunxi was afraid that Gu Beiyue would be in pain. She was a person who would protect and be biased. As a doctor, she was very clear that there was no wound that didn't hurt. Even if the wound was anesthetized, it would still hurt after the anesthesia. She was also not a good-tempered doctor. She often reprimanded patients who yelled and didn't cooperate because they were afraid of pain. However, when facing some people, she was especially afraid that they would feel pain. Of course, the pain was a small matter. Pulling on the wound was a big matter. The room was silent. Han Yunxi's gaze was focused on Gu Beiyue's wound. She was serious, professional, and strict. Her delicate brows were tightly knitted. She was so serious that no one dared to disturb her. However, Gu Beiyue couldn't help but want to reach out and gently smooth her brows. He wanted to tell her, "It's okay. If you're injured, then so be it. As long as you're alive, I can still protect you." He liked this serious look of hers the most. However, he hated it the most when she looked at his wound like this. No matter how much he disliked it, no matter how much he couldn't hold it in, he had to endure it. Suddenly, a large hand reached out and interrupted Gu Beiyue's thoughts. It was Long Fei Yi. He was standing at the side. His large hand brushed away Han Yunxi's furrowed brows. He wasn't gentle at all and seemed to be a little unhappy. "Rest. I'll do it," he said coldly. It was already considered an improvement that the big vinegar jar had been knocked over at this time. How could he allow Han Yunxi to apply medicine on another man under his nose? Moreover, this man was Gu Beiyue. Han Yunxi's hand stiffened slightly. She said calmly, "This wound is very deep." In other words, she meant that Long Fei Yi wouldn't be able to treat this wound. However, Long Fei Yi insisted. "I've treated wounds even deeper than this. Let me do it." He was domineering. He directly snatched the medicine from Han Yunxi's hand. Han Yunxi knew him too well. Furthermore, she had learned from Gu's mistake. She knew that if she didn't give in, they would probably argue. With Gu Beiyue's usual humility, he should have given in when he saw Long Fei Yi's attitude. However, this time, he remained silent and waited. Would Han Yunxi give in? Chapter 613. Would Han Yunxi yield? Long Fei Yi and Gu Beiyue both looked at Han Yunxi, one keeping silent while the other didn't urge her. Han Yunxi's eyes drooped as her gaze rested on Gu Beiyue's wound. When she was practicing medicine, she hated nothing more than being interrupted. But Long Fei Yi had always been an exception. She didn't hesitate for long. No matter what the reason was, she couldn't delay Gu Beiyue's treatment. She quickly replied to Long Fei Yi, "The wound is very deep. It's different from the ones you've seen before, so you can't treat it. Have Su Donglin hurry and find a doctor to take care of it. I've been tired these past few days and can't concentrate." This counted as both insisting and yielding. It was half and half. Gu Beiyue's eyes flashed with amusement. He knew that with Han Yunxi's skills, the wound would be treated by the time Su Donglin found a doctor. In truth, she was insisting. This woman was always so smart. As expected, she wouldn't disappoint him. As a doctor, even if she was a poison doctor, she still had basic principles. There was no reason to delay a patient's treatment, unless she didn't want to save him from the start. Gu Beiyue couldn't help but recall the first time he'd met Han Yunxi. She'd been so resolute, decisive, and outspoken at General Mu's estate. She didn't want to save him, nor did she need a reason to save him. Even now, she did things her own way. She didn't need to explain herself to anyone except Long Feiyi. Long Feiyi was her only exception. Wasn't this what he'd been hoping for? In all of Cloud Realm Continent, only Long Feiyi could truly protect this woman. If there came a day when she couldn't keep her status, only Long Feiyi could fight against the ambitious wolves of the 7 noble families. He had always been rational and never indulged in his own emotions, but this time, seeing Long Feiyi frown for her made him feel bad. He actually felt reluctant to part with her. Was it because his body was too weak this time, and so was his heart? Abruptly, Long Fei pulled Han Yunxi aside without a word and took over her spot. Han Yunxi suddenly frowned. She was clearly angry. Gu Beiyue came back to his senses in an instant. He was both shocked and anxious. Just as he was about to open his mouth to persuade her, Long Feiyi nimbly picked up the medicine to clean the wound. His movements were completely unprofessional, but his speed was much faster than Han Yunxi's. In just a few moments, he had cleaned Gu Beiyue's wound of the old medicine residue. However, there was a price to pay, and the price was pain. Gu Beiyue, who had been tormented by countless injuries and illnesses, was in so much pain that he closed his eyes. Blue veins appeared on his forehead. One could imagine how painful it was. But Han Yunxi didn't make a sound, nor did she stop him. She only watched in shock from the side. That was because Long Feiyi's simple and crude movements hadn't affected the wound at all. Long Feiyi hadn't lied. He'd treated even deeper and more serious wounds before. He had treated himself before. He had endured injuries that were even more painful than this. As long as he didn't die from the pain, he was fine. After cleaning the wound, Long Feiyi began to apply medicine. His movements were just as simple and crude, just as fast. His movements were just as unprofessional, but the dragon tendon powder quickly spread deep into the wound. Gu Beiyue was in so much pain that his hands clenched into fists. Blue veins popped out on the backs of his hands. Lil Thing squeaked at the sight, but Long Feiyi found it too noisy. He brushed it aside and had Lil Thing roll into the bed. Han Yunxi still didn't understand how Long Feiyi had applied the medicine before he began to bandage the wound. It didn't look good at all, but it was firm and wouldn't loosen. The medicine wouldn't leak out either. Seeing this, Han Yunxi had nothing to be angry about. She asked incredulously, Long Feiyi, who've you helped bandage before? If he could train someone to this level, he had to have bandaged their wounds multiple times. Had anyone by his side ever been so seriously injured? And multiple times at that. It was impossible that he'd hurt his own shadow guards. This lofty fellow couldn't possibly treat their wounds personally. Tang Li. Chu Shifeng. You don't know him, Long Feiyi replied offhandedly before heading out the door. Han Yunxi was certain that Gu Beiyue was only in pain and was fine. She quickly chased after him and didn't know whether to laugh or cry when she saw the scene outside. Long Feiyi was outside washing his hands very carefully. He didn't even treat Gu Beiyue so seriously. He had mysophobia. I don't know him. Is he from the Tang clan? Han Yunxi pressed on. She knew all of Long Fei's subordinates, but hadn't interacted much with the Tang clan. No, he's dead, Long Fei replied coldly, a little impatient. Then how did he get hurt? Han Yunxi was more curious about this. After all, it wasn't easy to injure someone so severely. Besides the Chu clan's arrows and Tang clan's assassination weapons, what other weapons could injure someone so severely? How did he get hurt? Of course he'd hurt himself. He'd hurt himself plenty of times when he'd been practicing his whip skills. His whip was no less powerful than the Chu clan's arrows and Tang clan's assassination weapons. Whip after whip had landed on his own legs. It was common for his skin to split open and his flesh to be torn open. Naturally, he'd hurt his tendons and bones. He'd treated all of his wounds himself. Mu Fei only gave him medicine and never helped him treat his wounds, much less find a doctor for him. If anyone else had asked, Long Fei Yi would have pretended he hadn't heard and walked away. But he couldn't avoid Han Yunxi at all, because this woman dared to chase after him. In the end, he said, Tang Li was the one who hurt me. You should ask him. Han Yunxi was doubtful. Didn't this guy just say he didn't know him? Could it be that things are complicated? Fine, I'll ask Tang Li later. Tang Li was currently catching up on sleep. She didn't know if he'd have nightmares. When she returned to the room, Gu Beiyue's pain had subsided. He sat up to examine his wounds. Like Han Yunxi, he was full of questions. But he wouldn't ask. And even if he did, Long Fei Yi would only pretend he hadn't heard. Many thanks, Your Highness Duke of Qin. He bowed with both hands. It wasn't an act, but a sincere thanks to Long Fei Yi. Long Fei Yi accepted his thanks graciously. After applying the dragon tendon powder, Han Yunxi felt much more at ease. Now, she just had to wait for Elder Shin and Elder Zhang to arrive, as well as news from Gu and Mu Ling. Han Yunxi sat down and asked seriously, Dr. Gu, can the wound on your leg heal completely? Will it affect your normal movements? Gu Beiyue was silent. Han Yunxi didn't pursue the matter, but her heart clenched. She was afraid of receiving a negative answer. After a while, Gu Beiyue smiled helplessly. I can't treat it myself. What about the others? What about Elder Shin? Elder Shin is already on his way, Han Yunxi asked anxiously. I hope so, Gu Beiyue said lightly. Actually, his answer was only to give Han Yunxi hope. He wasn't lying. He just didn't finish his sentence. He couldn't treat it, so no one could, not even the dean of the medical college. Han Yunxi thought that if he had hope, then there must be hope. Even if Shin Jueming couldn't treat it, the medical college still had doctors who were better than him. Even if Gu and Mu Ling couldn't find a good medicine, there was still the king of medicine. She could ask the king of medicine. Elder Shen is already on his way. He'll definitely arrive in 10 days at the latest. Gu and Mu Ling will also help you find medicine. Just tell us what medicine you need. As long as it's available, we'll definitely find it, Han Yunxi said seriously. Gu Beiyue smiled and nodded. Thank you, Princess Consort. Han Yunxi ignored his politeness and asked again, how did you fall into the hands of the Chu clan? What happened? Why were they so ruthless? As soon as Han Yunxi said this, Gu Beiyue knew what was going on. This stupid woman didn't suspect anything about the Thousand Buddha Cave. It was no wonder that she didn't notice that he was watching her when she was focused on the 1,000-year ginkgo tree. How should he answer her? Long Fei Yi stood to the side with his eyes lowered. He was also waiting for an answer. Gu Beiyue didn't think for long before he said, I was originally going to visit an old friend in Medical City, but was suddenly attacked on the road. I assumed it was a group of bandits and wanted to pay them some silver to settle the matter. Who knew that they would shoot before I even got off the carriage? I was unconscious at that time. I don't know what happened, but when I woke up, I saw the Chu clan. They gave me some medicine and then handed me over to Ningqing. He said, then asked, what's going on? Did the Chu clan betray Western Zhou? Why did Great General Ning? Long Fei's lips quirked up into a cold smile. Gu Beiyue looked gentle and harmless, but he was actually a shrewd person. When he spoke of lies, it was so natural. He even asked Han Yunxi questions to dispel Han Yunxi's suspicions. Han Yunxi explained the situation concisely, causing Gu Beiyue to sigh. Then this one doesn't understand. The Chu clan could have just exchanged me for Chu Tianyin. Why did they have to hand me over to Ningqing? Gu Beiyue couldn't figure it out. That day, Ning Cheng's subordinates had taken him away and locked him up. It wasn't until yesterday that he saw Ning Qing again during the hostage exchange. Han Yunxi wanted to ask more questions, but Gu Beiyue asked her instead. I reckon the Chu and Ning clans hadn't fallen out with each other yet when Chu Yuni handed you over to Ning Qing. As she spoke, she smiled coldly. It can only be said that Chu Yuni overestimated himself. Ning Qing is the true master of Cloud Realm Trade Consortium, so he must have long wanted to swallow up the Chu clan troops. Han Yunxi didn't explain the Nether and D clans to Gu Beiyue on purpose. After all, he was only a doctor and didn't need to know so much. But Han Yunxi had no idea that the words, Cloud Realm Trade Consortium, had stirred up huge waves in Gu Beiyue's heart. Gu Beiyue had been trying to find out the whereabouts of the 7 noble families and keep an eye on their movements. The D clan was one of the few he kept an eye on. Naturally, he'd suspected Cloud Realm Trade Consortium, but the surname of the head of the consortium made him hesitate. Moreover, the upper echelons of the consortium were mysterious and difficult to investigate, so he could only keep an eye on them. Esteemed Wang Fei, isn't Cloud Realm Trade Consortium one of the Ouyang clan's businesses? He asked. The Ouyang clan is nothing more than a cover. Ouyang Ning Nuo and Ouyang Ning Jing are both surnamed Ning. Ning Cheng, Ning Nuo, Ning Anjing, and Ning Anjing. Before Han Yunxi could finish, Gu Beiyue understood. Promise, quiet, his heart gave a start. What a Chu Yuni. So he knew the whereabouts of the D clan long ago, but kept it from me. The D clan's Ning family had hidden their identities to amass such wealth and military strength. What were they planning to do? You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.